Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Words. If you found this video, you're probably looking for something to fall asleep, and I'm here to deliver. But before starting, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It started as an ordinary weekend. I had just finished another exhausting work week, drowning in emails and endless meetings. The thought of escaping into something different, something thrilling, felt like a much-needed break from the monotony of my daily routine. So when my best friend suggested we check out an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, I didn't hesitate. The mansion wasn't just any old, run-down building. It had a reputation. For years, people in our town swapped stories about what happened there. Strange noises, shadowy figures, and even rumors of people going in and never coming out. Of course, most of these stories came from bored teenagers looking to spook each other, but something about the way the house stood, dark and lifeless, made it feel different. I wasn't alone that night. My friend and I had grown up together, spending our childhood exploring the woods, sneaking out to watch horror movies, and daring each other to do the dumbest things. This, in comparison, didn't seem all that bad. At least, that's what we told ourselves. The drive out there was uneventful. The town faded behind us as we followed the cracked pavement leading into the countryside. Streetlights became sparse, and the trees on either side of the road loomed taller, their twisted branches forming a jagged tunnel above us. We parked a few blocks away, not wanting to leave the car too close in case someone saw us. As we walked the last stretch, the air grew colder. It wasn't just the night chill, it was something else. The kind of cold that settles deep in your bones, making you feel like you're being watched. The mansion stood at the end of a long dirt driveway, its iron gates rusted and slightly ajar. The house itself was massive, with towering pillars and shattered windows that made it look like something straight out of a nightmare. Overgrown vines snaked up the walls, and the front steps were cracked with age. We stood there for a moment, just staring at it. The longer we looked, the more unnatural it seemed. The trees surrounding the property swayed slightly, but there was no wind. No sounds of crickets or distant cars. Just silence. I turned to my friend, forcing a smirk. Last chance to back out. They rolled their eyes. Please, you're the one who looks ready to run. I laughed, but my grip on the flashlight tightened. The wooden door was surprisingly easy to push open. No creaks, no resistance. Almost like it had been waiting for us. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, a faint metallic scent that clung to the back of my throat. The main hall stretched before us, a grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling, its crystals dull with dust. An old staircase spiraled upward, disappearing into darkness. On either side, doorways led into rooms shrouded in shadows. The wallpaper was peeling, and deep scratches marked the wooden floors as if something had been dragged across them. I lifted my flashlight, sweeping it across the walls. Faded paintings stared back at me, portraits of people with hollow eyes and expressions that looked too real. Creepy, my friend muttered, stepping ahead. We moved deeper inside, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. Everything felt untouched, frozen in time. A grand piano sat in the corner of the room, its keys exposed as if someone had left in a hurry. A broken mirror leaned against the far wall, its cracked surface reflecting our distorted figures. There was something unsettling about being inside. The silence wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It felt like something was swallowing it. No echoes, no distant creaks from the settling house. Just nothing. My friend reached for their phone, turning on the flashlight to get a better look at an old bookshelf against the wall. As the light flickered, a shadow darted across the hallway behind them. I froze. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart started pounding in my chest. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, a soft thud echoed from upstairs. Both of us turned, staring up into the darkness at the top of the staircase. That was the moment we realized we weren't alone in the house. The soft thud from upstairs echoed through the mansion, lingering in the silence that followed. My friend and I exchanged a look, neither of us wanting to be the first to say what we were both thinking. We weren't alone. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. That could have been something falling, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My friend nodded, but I could tell they weren't convinced. Yeah, maybe a piece of the ceiling or something. Neither of us moved. The flashlight in my hand trembled slightly, the beam of light shaking as I aimed it toward the upper landing. The staircase stretched into darkness, the second floor swallowed in shadow. The only thing visible was the ornate railing, thick with dust, leading up to whatever waited beyond. Another sound. This time, a faint scraping. I turned to my friend. You heard that, right? They nodded slowly. Yeah, that was closer. My heart pounded harder. The house was supposed to be abandoned. We knew that. No one had lived here in decades. The town stories claimed that whoever had owned the mansion vanished under strange circumstances, leaving everything behind. Some people said squatters used the place, but the dust on the floor was undisturbed. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been here for years. Except now, something was moving upstairs. A decision we shouldn't have made. I should have suggested leaving right then and there. We had already seen the mansion, enough to brag about it later. But something kept us rooted in place. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the feeling that if we left without knowing what made that sound, it would haunt us forever. Should we check it out? My friend asked, their voice low. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. But another part of me, the same part that had always ignored better judgment, nodded. Yeah. Just to be sure. We moved toward the staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. Dust puffed up with every footfall, the old wood groaning softly beneath our weight. As we climbed, the house felt different. The air seemed heavier, the silence more unnatural. Reaching the top, we stood in a dimly lit hallway. The flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness, revealing a long corridor lined with doors on either side. Some were open just a crack, while others remained sealed shut, their wooden surfaces warped from age. At the far end, a massive window let in the moonlight, casting a dull glow over the floor. Something felt off. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the temperature. The upstairs was colder than the first floor, far colder than it should have been. The change was abrupt, like stepping into a different season entirely. My breath curled in faint white puffs, something that shouldn't have been possible inside a closed house in the middle of autumn. I don't like this, my friend muttered. Me neither. We crept forward, our footsteps muffled against the dust. The door closest to us stood slightly ajar, revealing just enough of the room beyond to make out shapes in the dark. Old furniture covered in white sheets, their ghostly forms looming in the shadows. A broken chair near the far wall. A dresser with a cracked mirror. And a single footprint in the dust. I froze. Wait. My friend stopped beside me, following my gaze. Their breath hitched. The footprint was fresh. I crouched, staring at it closely. It wasn't ours. The shoe print was different, narrower, longer than either of our feet. It led deeper into the room, where the darkness swallowed the rest of the floor. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. Someone had been here. Recently. My friend whispered, "That wasn't there when we came in." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. No, it wasn't. Then, from behind us, a soft creak. The sound of a door opening. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. One of the doors down the hallway had opened wider. Not all the way, just enough to change its position from before. The problem was, we hadn't touched it. I aimed the flashlight at the gap between the door and the frame. Nothing but blackness stared back. "We need to go," my friend whispered. For once, I agreed. I wasn't about to wait around to see who or what had moved that door. I started backing up, ready to head down the stairs, but then a shadow shifted in the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. It was subtle, barely visible, but it was there. Something inside the room moved, just enough to disrupt the faint light spilling in from the window at the end of the hall. I took a slow step backward, gripping my friend's sleeve. The shadow moved again, and then the door slammed shut. We didn't wait. We ran. Bolting for the staircase, we took the steps 2 at a time, nearly tripping over each other in our rush to get out. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The flashlight beam shook wildly in my grasp, illuminating the walls in erratic bursts. As we reached the bottom, a new sound joined the chaos. Footsteps. From upstairs. Fast. Heavy. Following us. We didn't stop to look back. We sprinted toward the open door, but just as we reached it, it slammed shut in our faces. I skidded to a halt, nearly crashing into the wood. My hands fumbled for the handle, twisting it hard. It didn't budge. "Help me," I gasped, yanking at it with all my strength. My friend joined in, both of us pulling, twisting, pounding against the door. But it wouldn't move. It was like something was holding it shut. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I turned my head just enough to see the shadow at the landing. It wasn't fully visible, just a vague, towering shape, darker than the rest of the hallway. But it was there, and it was watching us. The door handle twisted under my grip, not by me. Something on the other side was unlocking it. Without hesitation, I shoved against the wood. The door burst open, and we tumbled out onto the porch, gasping for breath. The night air hit us like a wave, sharp and freezing against our sweat-drenched skin. We didn't stop running, not until we reached the car. Fumbling with the keys, I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors the moment we were inside. My friend stared out the windshield, breathing hard. "Did you see?" "Yes," I cut them off, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The house loomed in the rearview mirror, dark and lifeless. Nothing moved. No shadow at the window. No sign of anything out of place. But we knew better. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as we sped away, leaving the mansion behind. We didn't talk about it on the ride home. We didn't have to, because whatever had been in that house, it hadn't wanted us to leave. The car ride back to town was dead silent. Neither of us had the words for what just happened. The only sound was the occasional crackle of gravel under the tires and the steady hum of the engine. I kept my hands locked on the wheel, my knuckles still white, my heartbeat refusing to slow down. My friend sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, their face pale. The mansion disappeared behind us, swallowed by the darkness of the road. But even as the trees blurred past, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't really leaving. That something had followed us. I checked the rearview mirror. Just darkness. No headlights behind us, no movement, nothing out of place. Still, the feeling clung to me like a second skin, a pressure at the back of my skull that refused to fade. I gripped the wheel tighter. "You saw it, right?" My friend nodded, but didn't turn to look at me. "Yeah." Their voice was tight. I don't even know what I saw, but it was there." I exhaled through my nose, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. "And the door unlocked on its own," they finished. Their voice was flat. Neither of us said anything else. By the time we got back to my place, the tension still hadn't lifted. My house wasn't big, just a single-story place with a small porch and a backyard that backed up against the woods. Normally, it felt safe. Not tonight. We stepped inside, locking the door behind us. The silence felt heavier than usual. I turned on every light in the house. It didn't help. "I need water," my friend muttered, heading toward the kitchen. I sat on the couch, rubbing my temples. The events of the night looped through my head like a broken record. The fresh footprint in the dust. The shadow at the top of the stairs. The footsteps chasing us. The way the door wouldn't budge until something or someone let us out. I didn't want to believe what we'd experienced. There had to be a logical explanation. The floorboards upstairs settling? An animal? Maybe the winds had pulled the door closed. But the shadow, that wasn't the winds. I ran a hand down my face. This doesn't make sense. From the kitchen, my friend called out, "Hey, did you leave the fridge open?" I frowned. "What?" I got up and walked over. My friend stood frozen in front of the refrigerator. The door was open, wide open, despite neither of us having touched it since we got back. "I didn't do this," they said. Their voice was quieter now, more unsure. I walked up beside them. The inside of the fridge was cold, condensation glistening on the shelves. But that wasn't what made my stomach clench. The temperature inside wasn't right. It wasn't just cold, it was freezing. A thin layer of frost clung to the food. The edges of the milk carton crystallized with ice. I reached inside and picked up a soda can. My fingers stuck to the metal for half a second before I yanked them away. It felt like it had been sitting in a freezer for hours. A chill ran down my spine. This isn't normal," I muttered. My friend took a slow step back. "We need to sleep. Maybe we're just on edge." I wanted to agree, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't done with us yet. At some point, we both dozed off in the living room. The TV was on, playing some late-night infomercial. I didn't even remember closing my eyes, but I woke up suddenly. The first thing I noticed was the time, 3:12 a.m. The second thing was the silence. The TV was off. The hum of the refrigerator? Gone. Even the distant sound of the wind outside had vanished. The world had gone completely still. A tightness formed in my chest. Something wasn't right. I shifted in my seat, my body stiff from sleeping upright. My friend was still on the couch, their head tilted at an odd angle. Their breathing was slow, steady. They hadn't woken up. I reached for the remote, intending to turn the TV back on. Then I heard it. A voice. From the hallway. I froze, my fingers gripping the remote tight enough to make my knuckles ache. It was faint, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. But it was there. A low murmur, just out of range of understanding. Someone was whispering in my house. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway leading to my bedroom was dark. The door was open just a sliver, revealing only shadows beyond. The whispering continued. Soft, urgent, too close. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My friends shifted in their sleep, oblivious. I reached out, gripping their arm and shaking them gently. "Hey," I whispered. They stirred but didn't wake. The whispering stopped. I held my breath. The house was still again. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me from all sides. Then the floor creaked, right outside my bedroom door. I shot to my feet, my breathing shallow. My eyes locked onto the darkness at the end of the hall. My heart pounded in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to not move. A new sound joined the silence. A single breath. Slow, raspy, coming from inside my room. I took a step back, then another. My friend stirred on the couch but still didn't wake. The bedroom door creaked open just an inch more. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my friend's shoulder and shook them hard. "Wake up." They groaned, blinking at me blearily. "What?" Before I could answer, the bedroom door slammed shut. We both jumped. My friend shot up from the couch, looking at me with wide, confused eyes. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My pulse pounded in my throat, my body locked in place. Then, from the hallway, a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My friend heard it too. Their face paled. "That's not the wind," they whispered. I forced my legs to move, inching toward the hall. I had to see, had to know what was happening in my own house. I reached for the light switch. My fingers brushed against the plastic. The bulb exploded. Glass rained down, tiny shards scattering across the floor. The hallway plunged into darkness. Then, knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. On my bedroom door. I backed away fast, nearly tripping over my own feet. My friend grabbed my arm. "We need to go." I didn't argue. We ran. Straight for the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the locks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, the knocking turned into pounding. As I wrenched the door open, a final sound echoed from inside the house. A voice! Low. Mocking. "You shouldn't have gone there." We bolted into the night. Neither of us stopped running until we were back in the car, speeding away from my house like the devil himself was on our heels. I didn't go back that night. And whatever had followed us from the mansion, it wasn't done yet. The car was speeding down the empty road, but no matter how far we got from my house, the feeling wouldn't leave. That crushing, suffocating presence sat in the back of my mind like a weight pressing down on my skull. My hands were locked so tight around the wheel that my fingers had gone numb, and my friend was shaking beside me, their eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror like they expected something to crawl out of the back seat. Neither of us had spoken since we left. We needed somewhere safe, somewhere with lights and people. I turned toward the one place I knew would still be open, a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The second I pulled into the parking lot, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. The neon glow of the open sign flickered in the window, a weak but reassuring light. A few cars were scattered in the lot, their windshields fogged up from the night chill. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and frying bacon. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, their voices a dull murmur over the sound of an old radio playing in the background. The waitress barely looked up as we slid into a booth in the corner. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to slow my breathing. My friend was staring at the table, their hands clenched into fists. Neither of us touched the menus in front of us. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "What the hell just happened?" My friends shook their head, rubbing their arms like they were freezing. "I don't know, but it followed us." Their voice was barely above a whisper. I swallowed. It spoke. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like saying them out loud made it all worse. But it had spoken. "You shouldn't have gone there." The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't my friend's. It had come from inside my house. My stomach twisted. "We should have never gone to that mansion." My friend looked up then, their face pale. "What if it's not just the house?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" Their throat bobbed as they swallowed hard. Then they turned their phone toward me. The screen was on the camera roll. It was a picture, one I didn't remember them taking. It was inside the mansion. The angle was low, like the phone had been held at waist level. The photo was dark, grainy, but I could still make out the main staircase in the center of the frame. And halfway up the stairs, something was standing there. The shape was wrong. It was human-sized, but distorted, like the features didn't belong. The head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its face swallowed by shadow. The longer I stared, the more my stomach churned, because in the far corner of the photo, barely visible, I could see myself and my friend. And that meant that thing was watching us. My voice was hoarse. My friend nodded, their fingers gripping the edge of the table, and we never saw it. A sharp shiver ran down my spine. "Delete it," I said, my voice firm. My friend hesitated, then pressed their thumb against the screen. The image disappeared. But somehow, that didn't make me feel any better. I glanced around the diner, suddenly hyper-aware of the fluorescent lights overhead, the soft clinking of silverware. It all felt too normal, like we had stepped out of one world and into another. But my skin still crawled, like we hadn't actually escaped. Then, the lights flickered. Just once. A brief, shuddering blink. My friend stiffened. "Did you see that?" I nodded, my stomach nodding. It was subtle. Nothing anyone else in the diner seemed to notice. But it was enough. A sickening realization settled over me. It was here. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice. "We need to go." My friend didn't argue. I threw some cash on the table and we hurried out. The second we stepped outside, the night air hit me like a punch to the gut. It was heavy, wrong. And then, my car alarm started blaring. The sharp, piercing wail shattered the quiet. My keys were still in my pocket. No one was near the car. The headlights flashed erratically, the sound cutting through the empty parking lot like a scream. I rushed forward, fumbling with the keys, but as I got closer, something shifted in the back seat. I froze. Through the fogged-up glass, something moved. My chest seized. The outline was barely visible, but it was there. A shape, hunched and motionless. I had locked the car. I knew I had locked it. But now, something was inside. I yanked my friend back. "Get in your car. Now." They hesitated for half a second before bolting toward their own car, parked 2 spaces away. My hands were shaking as I hit the unlock button, flung the door open, and jumped inside. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisting it so hard I thought it would snap. The car roared to life. I threw it into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement. My friend's car was right behind me, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The thing in my backseat hadn't moved, but I felt it. The same crushing weight as before, pressing against the back of my skull. The air in the car was thick, suffocating. I refused to look in the mirror. If I looked, it would know. My hands were trembling as I gripped the wheel. "Don't stall. Don't stall. Don't stall." I slammed on the gas. The tires skidded, then caught traction. I shot forward, speeding out of the lot like my life depended on it. Because it did. My friend followed, their car right behind mine. The diner disappeared in the rearview mirror. The dark road stretched ahead, leading back into town. Only when we were several miles away did I risk a glance at the back seat. Empty. The breath I had been holding finally escaped. My chest ached. My fingers were still clenched around the wheel, my knuckles bone white. I grabbed my phone and, with a shaking hand, typed out a message to my friend. "Are you okay?" The response came immediately. I swallowed hard. My friend's car pulled up beside mine at the next stoplight. They rolled down the window. Their face was pale, their eyes wide. "I kept hearing breathing behind me," they said. But when I looked, there was nothing there. I gritted my teeth. "We need to figure out what's going on. This isn't over." My friend hesitated, then nodded. "Where do we start?" I stared ahead at the empty road, the only place I could think of. The mansion. We drove in silence, the road stretching ahead like a black void. My hands were still gripping the wheel too tightly, my breath uneven. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted. If anything, it had settled deeper, like something unseen had coiled around my ribs and refused to let go. My friend's car stayed close behind, their headlights casting long shadows along the asphalt. The mansion loomed somewhere in the distance, hidden in the darkness. The very thought of going back made my stomach turn. But what choice did we have? Something had followed us. Something had made itself known. And if we didn't do something, I wasn't sure it would ever leave. The drive felt longer than before, every second dragging as the unease in the pit of my stomach grew. The town faded behind us, streetlights becoming sparse, buildings turning into silhouettes against the trees. Soon, there was nothing but the road, the night, and the creeping dread pressing down on us. When we finally turned onto the dirt path leading to the mansion, my friend's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Are you sure about this?" No, not even a little. But I couldn't say that. Instead, I let out a breath and forced my voice to stay steady. "We don't have a choice." Silence on the other end. Then, a quiet, "Yeah, I know." The mansion stood ahead, swallowed in darkness. The air around it felt thicker, heavier than before. The wind barely moved the trees, and the world was too quiet. I killed the engine, gripping the keys so tightly it dug into my palm. My friend parked beside me, neither of us making a move to get out. The mansion sat there, watching, waiting, and I had the sickening feeling it knew we were back. A shaky breath escaped me. "Let's go." We stepped out into the night, the crunch of gravel under our feet unnaturally loud. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of decay, like old wood and something rotting. My fingers twitched toward my pocket, even though I had nothing. No weapon, no flashlight, nothing that would make this any easier. The front door loomed ahead, still slightly ajar, just like we had left it. A shiver ran down my spine. The same heavy stillness pressed against my skull, but I forced my legs to move. Each step felt slower, like the air itself was pushing back. The floor groaned under our weight as we stepped inside. The darkness swallowed us whole, and I could barely see a few feet ahead. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my breath unsteady. Then, my friend's phone screen lit up. The dim glow cast long shadows across the dusty floor, flickering against the peeling wallpaper. The main hall stretched ahead, leading toward the staircase. My gaze flicked toward the steps, the same ones from the photo. And that's when I saw it. A footprint. Not ours. The dust should have been undisturbed, but there, right at the base of the stairs, a single footprint was pressed into the floor. Larger than mine. The edges blurred, like whatever had made it had been standing there for a while. My stomach twisted. "I don't think we're alone," I whispered. My friend swallowed hard. "I don't think we ever were." We moved carefully, our steps slow, deliberate. The deeper we went, the more wrong everything felt. The air was thick, damp, pressing against my skin like a second layer. The scent of rot was stronger now, clinging to the walls. Then my friend grabbed my wrist. I barely bit back a startled breath. "What?" They didn't answer, just raised their phone screen toward the hallway ahead. And I saw it. The door. It was the only one that was open. Every other door in the hallway remained closed, untouched by time. But this one was cracked open, just enough to see the pitch-black void beyond it. A chill crawled up my spine. "That wasn't open before," my friend whispered. No, it wasn't. A long silence stretched between us. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness growing heavier. And then we heard it. A breath. Low, raspy, from the other side of the door. My blood turned to ice. My friend took a step back, their fingers digging into my sleeve. We needed to leave. Now! I turned on my heel, grabbing my friend's arm as we moved fast. My pulse was thundering in my ears, drowning out everything else. The floorboards groaned beneath us, the cold seeping into my bones. The front door was ahead. Just a few more steps. Then the sound came again. A whisper, right behind us. The temperature dropped. My breath left my lips in a visible puff. The air pressed down on my chest, and every instinct in my body screamed at me not to turn around. But my friend did, and they froze. Their face went pale, eyes wide with horror. Then a force slammed into me. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. My ears rang, pain shooting up my spine. The world tilted, my vision swimming. And that's when I saw it. A shadow! It wasn't human. It wasn't anything. Just a void, a gaping absence of light standing at the edge of the hallway. Watching. Waiting. My friend grabbed my arm, yanking me up. My legs barely worked, but I ran. We ran. Through the main hall, past the staircase, toward the door. The floor trembled beneath us. The air crackled. The walls groaned. Something moved behind us, fast, too fast. I lunged for the door, my fingers curling around the handle. Yanked. Pulled. The wood was ice cold, my palms slick with sweat. Then, a scream. Not from us. From inside the house. A sound that wasn't human. That wasn't anything I had ever heard before. It rattled through my skull, vibrating in my bones. The door finally gave way. We burst into the night, stumbling onto the front steps. The moment we crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The weight lifted. The suffocating pressure was gone. I staggered to a stop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My friend was doubled over, hands on their knees, shaking. The mansion loomed behind us, silent, empty, like it had never been anything more than a decaying house. But I knew better. We stood there for what felt like forever. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Finally, my friend whispered, "We are never coming back here." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. We got into our cars, hands still trembling. And we drove. As fast and as far as we could. We never spoke about it again. Never told anyone. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the air is still, I swear I can hear something. A whisper. Right behind me. It's been years since that night. I don't go near that town anymore. I don't even drive in that direction. It's not that I'm afraid of the mansion itself, though I have every reason to be. It's the feeling that something followed me home. That no matter how far I go, no matter how much time passes, it's still there. Watching. Waiting. Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, my body frozen with the same heavy stillness I felt inside that house. I'll lie there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that the pressure on my chest is just my mind playing tricks on me. That the faint breath I swear I hear next to my ear is nothing more than the wind outside. But then there are nights when I hear something else. A whisper, low, raspy, just like the one from the mansion. I never turn my head, never look, because deep down, I know that if I do, I won't be alone. I stopped telling people about what happened a long time ago. The few I confided in either laughed it off or gave me that uneasy look, like they believed me but didn't want to believe me. And maybe that's for the best. Because if you believe it, it becomes real. I still think about my friends sometimes. We don't talk much anymore. After that night, something changed between us. We never said it out loud, but I think we both knew we brought something back. I remember the last time we spoke. It had been months since that night. Life had moved on, Or at least it was supposed to. But when I picked up the phone and heard their voice, I knew it hadn't. Not really. "I still see it," they whispered. A cold chill crawled down my spine. "What do you mean?" A long pause. Then a shaky breath. "In my apartment. In my car. In the corner of my room when the lights are off." I gripped the phone tighter. "Have you told anyone?" A short laugh, humorless. "And say what?" "That something is following me?" I didn't answer, because I understood. We stayed silent for a while. The kind of silence that stretched too long, heavy with everything we didn't say. Then, in the quiet, my friend spoke again. "Have you heard it?" My fingers tightened around the phone. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I could have lied. Could have told them no, that everything was fine. That it was all in our heads. But instead, I whispered, "Yes." Neither of us spoke after that. Eventually, they just hung up. I haven't heard from them since. I don't know where they are. I don't ask. Because deep down, I'm afraid of the answer. This happened about 6 years ago. I was 26 at the time, working a demanding job in the city. Long hours, little sleep, and a constant feeling that life was slipping away in a blur of deadlines and subway rides. So when an old friend suggested a trip to a cabin by a remote lake, it seemed like exactly what I needed. A week away from emails, calls, and the hum of city life sounded perfect. The plan was simple: fishing, hiking, and just existing without the usual distractions. It was me, my friend, and his younger brother. I won't use their real names, but let's call them Nathan and Kyle. Nathan was the one who invited me. We'd been close since college, though life had pulled us in different directions. He was the outdoorsy type, always pushing for these kinds of trips. Kyle was a few years younger, more into photography and reading, but he tagged along for the experience. We packed up Nathan's old SUV and set off on a humid July morning, the kind where the heat clings to your skin before you've even done anything. The drive took nearly 4 hours, winding through endless trees and roads that felt like they hadn't been driven on in weeks. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The last stretch of the road was gravel, cutting through a thick forest before opening up to the lake. It sat right at the water's edge, surrounded by towering pines that swayed lazily in the wind. The lake stretched out in front of it, calm and mirror-like, reflecting the sky. At first glance, it was beautiful, isolated, peaceful. The kind of place where you could breathe without the weight of the world pressing down on you. But the cabin itself, there was something about it that felt off. It wasn't just the way it looked, though it was definitely run down, peeling paint, an old porch with missing planks, windows that seemed too dark even in the daylight. It was more than that. A kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like the world just stopped moving the moment we arrived. Kyle joked about it right away. "This place looks like something out of a horror movie," he laughed, snapping a picture of the cabin. Nathan rolled his eyes. "Relax. It's just old. The guy who owns it barely does any upkeep." I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was overthinking things. We were deep in the woods. Of course it felt different. Of course it felt isolated. That was the whole point. The inside of the cabin was just as outdated as the outside. Dusty furniture, an old stone fireplace, wooden walls covered in fishing gear, and faded photos. A narrow hallway led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. The kitchen was basic: an old fridge that hummed loudly, a scratched-up wooden table, and a single dim light hanging from the ceiling. There was a smell to the place, too. Not quite rotten, but stale, like it had been closed up for too long. The air inside felt heavier than outside. Nathan, being the way he was, immediately claimed the biggest room, tossing his duffel bag onto the bed. Kyle and I took the other one, which was barely big enough for 2 twin beds and a nightstand between them. After unloading the car, we did a quick walk around the cabin, checking out the dock, the small boathouse nearby, and the stretch of trees behind the property. There was no one else around. No neighbors, no other cabins in sight. Just miles of woods and the lake, still and silent under the sun. That night, we sat out on the porch, drinking and watching the sky turn dark over the lake. The silence was thick. No distant hum of traffic, no planes overhead. Just the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface of the water. Kyle set up his camera, taking long exposure shots of the stars. Nathan was talking about waking up early to fish. I just listened, soaking in the quiet. At some point, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I hadn't heard a single bird since we got there. Not one. Even in deep woods, you hear something: the rustling of animals, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. But here, nothing. The quiet was too complete, too absolute. I must have made a face because Kyle nudged me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." I wasn't tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. We turned in around midnight. I lay awake in that tiny bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The cabin creaked as the wind pushed against it. At some point, I heard something outside. A soft, slow movement near the window. Like footsteps, but too light, too careful. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, a scrape. Like something dragging against the wooden porch. I turned my head, expecting Kyle to wake up, but he was out cold. The room felt colder than before, the air pressing down on me. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon, maybe a deer. But something deep inside me knew better. And whatever it was too close. I lay there, completely still, trying to convince myself I hadn't actually heard anything. The cabin was old. It could have been settling. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes, right? Maybe it was just that. But my body wasn't buying the logic. My skin felt too tight, my breathing too shallow. I turned my head toward the window. The glass was smudged with years of dust and grime, but I could still see out into the dark. The moon cast a pale glow over the porch, illuminating the old wooden steps. Something moved just out of sight. A slow, deliberate shift in the darkness. My stomach knotted. I strained my ears, but everything was too quiet. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just an unnatural silence pressing in around me. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to check. But at the same time, my body was screaming at me that something wasn't right. I reached over and shook Kyle's shoulder. "Hey," I whispered. "Wake up." He groaned, shifting onto his side. "What?" "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" His voice was thick with sleep. I hesitated. The sound was gone now. The moment I woke him, it had stopped. "Never mind." He muttered something under his breath and turned away from me. I stared back at the window. The porch was empty. Still, it took me hours to fall asleep. The next morning, I was the first one up. The sun had barely started to rise, casting long shadows through the trees. I stepped outside, stretching the stiffness from my body, and my eyes immediately went to the porch. There were marks on the wood. Long, thin scratches, too deep to be from wind or weather. They stretched from the edge of the steps toward the door, like something had been dragged across the porch in the night. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Probably a raccoon, I muttered to myself. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Raccoons didn't leave marks like this, and they sure as hell didn't move that quietly. Behind me, the cabin door creaked open. Damn, you're up early. Nathan stepped out, rubbing his eyes. He yawned and stretched, not noticing my expression. I didn't sleep great, I admitted. Something was moving outside last night. That got his attention. He frowned, looking around. Like what? I motioned toward the scratches. He crouched down, running his fingers over them. That's weird, he admitted. Maybe a deer? I shook my head. You ever seen a deer scratch up wood like that? Kyle stumbled out of the cabin, still half asleep. What's going on? I pointed at the marks. He blinked at them, rubbing his arms like he was suddenly cold. Okay, that's creepy. Probably nothing, Nathan said, standing up. I'm making breakfast. That was Nathan for you. Never the type to get spooked easily. He had this way of shrugging things off, like the world couldn't touch him. But Kyle wasn't so quick to brush it off. He took a few pictures of the scratches, frowning. I don't like this. Neither did I. The day passed uneventfully. We spent most of it on the lake, fishing and swimming. By mid-afternoon, the sun was blazing, and for a while, the strange feeling from the night before faded. But that evening, something else happened. We were back at the cabin, sitting around the fire pit just beyond the porch. The air was cooler, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the damp scent of the lake. Kyle had his camera out, snapping pictures of the trees, the water, the way the firelight flickered against the cabin walls. He was flipping through the shots when he suddenly froze. What the hell? I looked over. His face had gone pale, eyes locked on his camera screen. Nathan leaned in. What is it? Kyle turned the camera around so we could see. It was a picture of the tree line, just the woods, dark and endless, stretching beyond the fire. But in the middle of the shot, half hidden between the trees, was a figure. Not an animal. A person. Tall, thin, standing deathly still. The moment I saw it, my stomach turned to ice. That wasn't there when I took the picture, Kyle said, his voice tight. I swear. Nathan snorted. Probably just a trick of the light. Kyle shook his head. No, look at it. Nathan took the camera, zooming in. The closer he got, the worse it looked. The figure's arms were too long. Its face was too pale. And its eyes, if they were eyes, were just two black holes. A sick, uneasy silence settled over us. Okay, Nathan finally said, tossing the camera onto Kyle's lap. I don't know what that is, but I'm not freaking out over a blurry picture. Kyle wasn't convinced. Neither was I. We scanned the woods, but nothing moved. The trees stood still, their branches swaying gently in the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Watching. Waiting. That night, I barely slept again. Every sound made my muscles tense. Every creak of the cabin had my heart pounding in my throat. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I shot upright, my breath stuck in my throat. I turned toward Kyle, but he was already awake, his eyes wide and filled with fear. Nathan's door creaked open, and he appeared in the hallway, his face groggy. Did you hear that? None of us moved. The air inside the cabin felt thick, like we were sealed inside a box with no oxygen. Then, another knock. Louder this time. Nathan, ever the fearless one, moved toward the door. Kyle grabbed his arm. Don't. Nathan pulled away, irritation flashing across his face. What if it's someone lost? We're in the middle of nowhere. Who the hell knocks in the middle of the night out here? I snapped. Nathan hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he stepped closer to the door. Hello? He called. Silence! He reached for the doorknob. Kyle and I tensed. My heart was hammering so hard I swore whoever was outside could hear it. Nathan yanked the door open. The porch was empty. The forest beyond was still. But the worst part? There were no footprints. The dirt in front of the door was undisturbed, no signs of anyone ever standing there. Kyle made a strangled sound in his throat. I felt my skin go cold. Nathan slammed the door shut, locking it. Okay, he muttered. That was weird. None of us slept after that. We just sat there, listening, waiting. We didn't speak much after that. The air inside the cabin was thick, heavy with something unspoken. Kyle sat on the couch, staring at the door, his fingers gripping the edge of his hoodie like he was trying to disappear inside it. Nathan paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, exhaling sharply every few minutes. I sat by the window, my eyes locked on the porch, watching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the trees, unmoving. The wind had completely died. It was too quiet. I checked my phone for the time. 3:42 a.m. We had a few more hours until sunrise, but time had started to stretch, warping in the silence. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes felt like hours. I kept replaying the knocks in my head, over and over. No footprints. That was the part I couldn't get past. The dirt outside the cabin should have shown some sign of someone standing there. But it hadn't. Kyle finally spoke. We need to leave. Nathan stopped pacing. What? Kyle looked up, his face pale. I'm not staying here another night. Nathan sighed, rubbing his eyes. Dude, it's the middle of the night. I don't care, Kyle said, his voice shaking. Something knocked on the door, and there was nobody there. Something was here, Nathan. I swallowed hard, staring at my hands. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say we were overreacting, but I couldn't. Nathan exhaled through his nose. Look, let's just wait until morning. If we leave now, we have to hike through the woods in the dark, and I'm not about to do that. Kyle hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He didn't like it, but he saw the logic. None of us wanted to step outside right now. So we stayed. We tried to sleep. We really did. Nathan went back to his room. Kyle curled up on the couch. I stayed in the chair by the window, my body stiff and alert. Somehow, at some point, exhaustion won. My eyelids grew heavy, and I must be drifted off. Then, a voice. My eyes snapped open. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. Kyle was still on the couch, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Nathan's door was shut, but the voice had been inside the cabin. Low, muted, like someone whispering just beneath hearing range. I strained my ears. Nothing. I told myself I imagined it. That exhaustion was messing with me. Then, another voice. This time, it was closer, right behind me. I spun around, my breath shuddering out of my chest. Nothing. Just the room, dimly lit by the dying fire. The wooden floor creaked as I shifted in my chair. I sat there, frozen, every muscle in my body locked. Then Kyle twitched in his sleep. He turned onto his side, brow furrowed like he was dreaming about something bad. I watched, my breath shallow, my skin crawling. Then, in the dead silence of the cabin, he muttered something in his sleep. I barely caught it, but it sounded like, "Don't open the door." My stomach clenched. I reached over and shook him, harder than necessary. Kyle. His eyes flew open. For a second, he looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Then his face cleared. What? You were talking in your sleep, I said quietly. He blinked. What did I say? I hesitated. You said, don't open the door. Kyle stiffened. He sat up quickly, glancing at the door like he expected it to fly open any second. Nathan's door creaked open. We both jumped. Nathan peeked out, rubbing his face. Why are you two whispering? I looked at Kyle. His face was pale, his hands balled into fists. I turned back to Nathan. Something's not right. Nathan sighed. We already knew that. No, I said, standing up. I mean, we need to figure out what's going on. If we just sit here waiting, it's only going to get worse. Nathan raised an eyebrow. What do you suggest? I hesitated. Then, against every instinct in my body, I said, we need to check outside. Kyle didn't want to go. He kept shaking his head, arms crossed tightly over his chest. This is stupid. This is exactly how people die in horror movies. Nathan rolled his eyes. And what's your plan? Sit here all night waiting for more weird stuff to happen? Kyle didn't answer. Neither did I, because honestly, that's exactly what I wanted to do. But something in me, the same stupid, reckless part of me that suggested we come to this cabin in the first place, was saying we had to go outside. Something had been knocking on the door. Something had been watching us from the trees. And I was starting to feel like whatever it was, it wasn't just going to go away. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed the flashlight. Nathan did the same. Kyle cursed under his breath, then grabbed his jacket. I hate both of you. Together, we stepped outside. The air was colder than before, almost unnaturally cold. My breath curled in front of me in a thin mist, even though it wasn't winter. The trees stood like silent watchers, stretching tall and still, their branches clawing at the night sky. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the dirt path leading toward the woods. Kyle stayed right behind me, his breathing short and shallow. Nathan walked ahead, his grip on the flashlight tight. We reached the edge of the trees. And then the smell hit us. Rotten. Wet. Like something dead had been sitting out in the sun for too long. Kyle gagged. Jesus, what is that? Nathan covered his nose. I don't know, but I don't want to find out. I took a slow step forward, shining my flashlight deeper into the trees. The smell got stronger. My stomach twisted. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Leading toward the cabin. And they weren't ours. The prints were huge, the indentations deep, as if whatever made them was heavy. And the worst part, they didn't have toes. Just long, narrow impressions, like something had been dragging itself forward. Kyle cursed. We need to go back inside. Nathan nodded, his bravado completely gone. Yeah. Now, I turned to head back, and that's when we heard it. A snap! Loud. Close. Like a branch breaking right behind us. None of us moved. My body locked up, my breath trapped in my throat. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head. And in the darkness of the trees, something moved. A shape shifting in the shadows. Tall, thin, watching us. It was closer than before. Too close. Nathan grabbed my arm. Run. And we did. We sprinted back toward the cabin, our footsteps pounding against the dirt, the cold air burning our lungs. I could feel it behind us, that thing, whatever it was, moving fast, almost gliding through the trees. We crashed through the door, slamming it shut, locking it. Kyle collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Nathan pressed his back against the door, his hands shaking. And outside, the knocking started again. The knocking didn't stop. Not this time. It came in steady, deliberate beats. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. It was slow, methodical, like whoever or whatever was outside knew we were trapped. Kyle was on the floor, his back pressed against the couch, knees pulled up to his chest. He wasn't even trying to hide the way his hands were shaking. Nathan stood against the door, his entire body tense, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And me? I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the door, my ears straining to hear anything else. For a brief second, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was a person. But then the door handle started turning. Slowly. Silently. Kyle sucked in a sharp breath. Nathan jolted away from the door like he'd been burned. Nobody moved. We just watched as the knob twisted, rattled slightly, then stopped. Silence! The worst kind of silence. Then the knocking started again, but this time it wasn't just on the door. It was on the windows, the walls, the roof. All at once. A dozen hands, maybe more, pounding against the cabin like it was surrounded. Kyle whispered, "What the hell is happening?" Nobody answered. Nathan's breathing had gone shallow. He turned his head slightly, eyes darting toward the windows, then back to the door. "We can't stay here." I wanted to agree, but where were we supposed to go? The truck was parked over a mile away, through the trees. Even if we ran for it, something told me we wouldn't make it. And that's when the worst thing happened. The kitchen door unlocked. I heard it, the click of the deadbolt, and my stomach dropped. I turned just in time to see the doors slowly creaking open. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then, a shape. Tall. Too tall. Its head brushed the top of the doorway, its limbs long and unnatural, joints bending the wrong way. It didn't move like a person. Didn't feel like one either. The air changed, thickened, like the whole cabin was being swallowed by something unseen. Then it stepped inside. The fire was low, but I could still see it. Its skin was the color of ash. Not gray, not black, not white. Just void. Like looking at something that wasn't fully there. Its arms were too long, fingers nearly dragging on the floor, ending in sharp, bony points. Its face, I don't even know how to describe it, because I don't think it had one. Just a smooth stretch of skin where features should have been, except for the mouth. A slit running across where a mouth didn't belong. And then it opened. Not like a human mouth, more like a wound splitting apart. And from the darkness inside, I heard our voices. Kyle, Nathan, me. It was repeating our words back to us. Not just from that night, but from earlier. From the drive up. From inside the cabin. Conversations we'd had hours ago. It wasn't talking. It was mimicking. Kyle made a choked noise in the back of his throat. Nathan grabbed my arm. "We have to go." But we were frozen. The thing took a step forward. Then another. Its footsteps made no sound. Then it stopped. Its head snapped toward Kyle. And suddenly, it rushed him. Nathan and I barely had time to react before it was on him. Kyle screamed. A real, raw, animal sound that didn't even sound like it came from a human throat. I grabbed him by the arms, yanking him backward just as the thing's fingers sliced through the air where he had been. Nathan was already moving, grabbing the fireplace poker and swinging it like a bat. The iron hit it square in the chest. The thing staggered. Not much, but enough. Kyle scrambled to his feet, his hands clawing at my jacket, pulling me with him. The thing tilted its head, facing Nathan now. Then it started laughing. Not a real laugh. A copy of Nathan's. Repeating the exact same sound he had made earlier that night. Then it lunged. Nathan barely dodged it, but the thing moved faster than anything he'd ever seen. Its arms shot out, grabbing him by the shoulder. Nathan yelled in pain. Kyle and I didn't think, we just rushed it. We crashed into its side, sending all three of us tumbling into the table. The wood splintered under our weight, shattering into pieces. The thing let go of Nathan. We didn't wait. We ran. We burst through the front door, stumbling into the cold, wet earth. Nathan was bleeding. His shoulder, where the thing had grabbed him, was burned. Kyle was already ahead of us, sprinting toward the trees. Move! The thing was coming. I could feel it. Not hear it, feel it. Like the air itself was shifting. Nathan and I ran. The trees blurred past us. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Kyle was in the lead. He wasn't even looking back. We didn't dare. Then Nathan stumbled. I barely managed to catch him before he hit the ground. I grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, pushing him ahead of me. We were almost there, almost to the truck. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, hands shaking so hard I could barely grip them. Kyle was already yanking the door open, climbing inside. Nathan shoved himself in after him, and just as I reached the door, the thing was behind me. I felt the cold brush against my neck. The air left my lungs. For a split second, I thought that was it, that I wouldn't make it, that it would pull me back into the trees, where no one would ever find me again. Then Nathan grabbed me. He yanked me into the truck so hard that I landed halfway on Kyle's lap, slamming the door shut behind me. The locks clicked, and for a moment, none of us moved. I turned my head just slightly toward the window, and it was there, standing inches away. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth still open, but this time it wasn't mimicking anything. It was grinning. Kyle slammed his fist against the dashboard. Go! I didn't hesitate. The truck roared to life, tires spinning in the dirt before finally catching and launching us forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I knew it was still standing there, watching us, maybe even laughing. The road stretched in front of us, winding through the trees. And as we left the cabin behind, I had only one thought running through my mind. We should've never come here. The truck sped down the dirt road, bouncing over uneven terrain, but I didn't let up on the gas. My hands were locked on the wheel, fingers cramping from how tightly I was gripping it. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest that I could barely hear the engine over the sound of my own pulse. Kyle was in the passenger seat, hunched over, one hand pressed against his forehead like he was trying to erase everything that just happened. Nathan was in the back, breathing hard, his head tilted against the window, his injured shoulder seeping blood through his jacket. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked at each other, because we all knew. Whatever had been in that cabin, whatever had been in the woods, we weren't supposed to see it, and it had let us leave. That was the worst part. I wasn't sure if we had escaped or if it had let us go. That thing wearing our voices, our laughs, our words, could have taken us if it wanted to. But it didn't. And that thought sat like a lead weight in my stomach. I kept my foot on the gas, pushing the truck as fast as the road would allow. The last thing I wanted was to get stuck out here. Not now. Not ever again. The trees blurred past. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, but I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until I saw the familiar stretch of pavement up ahead, where the dirt road met the highway. It felt like we'd been driving for hours, but in reality, it had probably been less than 10 minutes. As soon as the tires hit the pavement, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. But that relief? It didn't last. Nathan shifted in the back seat, his voice barely above a whisper. Check your phone. I hesitated. I hadn't looked at it all night. I barely had service in the woods anyway. But something in Nathan's tone made my skin crawl. Kyle pulled us out first, and the second his screen lit up, his face went white. His voice came out flat. Empty. There's a voicemail. I pulled mine out, my hands trembling. And sure enough, there it was. A single new voicemail. Time-stamped 40 minutes ago, when we were still in the cabin. Nathan swallowed. His own phone was in his lap, screen glowing in the darkness. He wasn't playing it. He wasn't even moving. Kyle's thumb hovered over the play button. His breathing was uneven. Then he hit it. At first, there was nothing. Just static. Then, through the crackling silence, a sound filtered through. A voice. My voice. But it wasn't me. We can't stay here. The exact words I had spoken inside the cabin. Then, a second voice joined. Kyle's. Nathan's. All three of us. Speaking. Laughing. Repeating the same words we had spoken hours ago. Then, the laughter warped. Distorted. Turned into something that didn't sound human. And then, just before the voicemail cut out, there was knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then silence. Kyle dropped his phone. Nathan pressed his fist against his mouth, his whole body trembling. I turned off the road, pulling into the first gas station I saw. I don't even remember how I got out of the truck. All I remember is the cold air hitting my face and the sound of my own breath coming out in short, sharp gasps. I braced my hands against the hood of the truck, my fingers digging into the metal. Kyle got out next. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at the empty road behind us. Nathan didn't move from the back seat. His head was still pressed against the window, his good hand gripping the edge of his seat so hard his knuckles looked bruised. Nobody spoke. Nothing made sense. None of it. Kyle ran a hand over his face. We have to tell someone. I turned to him. My voice came out hoarse. Tell them what? He didn't answer. Because we both knew. Nobody would believe us. Nobody should. And if they did, what then? Go back? Investigate? No. No, I wanted that place to stay buried in the woods, exactly where it belonged. We stayed in that parking lot for over an hour, just sitting there. Kyle kept checking the road behind us, as if expecting to see something. Nathan never once let go of his arm. His jacket was still soaked with his own blood. I kept hearing that voicemail over and over in my head. Hearing my own voice, saying things I knew I had said, but not in a voicemail. Not into a phone. So how had it? No, I couldn't keep thinking about it. We made a decision right then. A simple one. We would never speak about this again. Not to each other. Not to anyone. We left the gas station that night, each of us going our separate ways once we reached town. Nathan went straight to the hospital. He had third-degree burns on his shoulder. The doctors had no explanation for how he got them. Kyle deleted the voicemail the second he got home. And me? I drove around for 3 more hours before I could even think about walking into my apartment. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Even now, I still wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, right outside my door. And sometimes, when my phone buzzes and I see a new voicemail, I don't check it. I don't play it. Because part of me already knows what it'll hear. It's been a year. 365 days since I last saw that cabin. Since I last heard my own voice in a voicemail that should never have existed. Since I last saw Kyle and Nathan sitting in my truck, their faces pale, their hands shaking, their eyes filled with the same unspoken terror that I felt deep in my own chest. A lot has changed since then. Nathan moved out of state not long after that night. He never said it outright, but I knew why. He didn't want to be anywhere near that place. I don't blame him. He never told me exactly where he went, and I never asked. We haven't spoken since. Kyle stayed in town a little longer, but something in him was different after that night. He started drinking more, stopped showing up to work. You'd see him around sometimes, just sitting in his car, staring at nothing. Then, one day, he was just gone. Moved out of his apartment, cut off all his social media. I don't even know if he left town or if he's still here, somewhere, just keeping his distance. As for me, I tried to move on, tried to forget, tried to convince myself that nothing had followed me back, that nothing had stayed with me. But some nights, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear things. Not voices, not footsteps, just something. Something just outside my window. Something just outside my door. I tell myself it's nothing, that it's the wind, that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But I don't check my phone when I wake up and see a missed call from an unknown number. I don't listen to voicemails anymore. Not after the last one. The one that came 6 months ago. I was at work when I got the notification. A single voicemail. No missed call. Just the voicemail. My stomach tightened the second I saw it. I told myself I wouldn't check it, that I didn't need to. But that night, after staring at my phone for hours, I hit play. Static. Then, laughter. But not just any laughter. Kyle's. Nathan's. Mine. Laughing. Like we had that first night in the cabin, before everything went wrong. The recording played for a full 30 seconds before the laughter distorted, turned into something wrong. Something that didn't sound like us anymore. Then, 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Then silence. I sat in my room for hours after that, staring at the walls, listening, waiting. But nothing happened. Nothing ever does. It's almost worse this way. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's even real. All I know is that I never went back to that cabin, and I never will. Even now, as I sit here telling this story, my phone is on silent, face down, because in the middle of writing this, I got another voicemail. Unknown number. And I won't be listening to it. Not now. Not ever. Because I already know what it says. It all happened about 5 years ago. I had just started working as an IT specialist for a law firm in a downtown office building. The job wasn't exciting, but it paid well. And the best part? I could work late. I liked the silence of the office after hours. No ringing phones, no endless chatter, just me and my computer. The building itself was nothing special. It was one of those old structures that had been renovated so many times that it felt like a patchwork of different decades. The lower floors were modern, glass-walled conference rooms, sleek furniture, and bright LED lighting. But the upper floors, especially the ones that weren't frequently used, still had remnants of the past. Dark wood paneling, faded carpeting, doors with old brass knobs. And the air always felt stale, like no matter how much they tried to modernize it, something old still lingered there. I usually worked on the 8th floor, which was mostly empty after business hours. A few other departments occupied the space. Legal records, HR storage, and a couple of unused offices. It was the kind of place where the vending machines still sold expired snacks, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the air conditioning. That night, I was working on a system update that required all computers to be offline for several hours. It was just past midnight, and I was alone in the entire office. I had a routine for nights like this. Grab a coffee from the break room, put on some music, and knock out the work as quickly as possible. The security guard, an older guy who barely spoke, had already made his rounds. He waved at me on his way out, reminding me that the building would be locked until 6 a.m. I didn't mind being locked in. I had my laptop, my phone, and plenty of work to do. But as the hours stretched on, that quiet, comfortable solitude began to feel off. The air in the office seemed heavier, the fluorescent lights casting shadows that felt sharper than they should have been. But I shook it off. Just my mind playing tricks on me. I sat at my desk, typing away, the sound of the keyboard echoing in the empty office. Every so often, it glanced at the hallway outside my cubicle, just a long stretch of dimly lit offices and closed doors. The law firm had downsized recently, so most of these rooms were empty. No one should have been there. And yet, something felt wrong. It wasn't a noise exactly, but an awareness. That eerie, crawling sensation that you're not alone. That feeling of being watched, even when you know, logically, there's no one there. I told myself it was just the stillness of the office getting to me. But deep down, I knew better. Still, I pushed forward with my work, telling myself I was just overtired. I finished running updates on most of the computers and leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. When I opened them again, my heart nearly stopped. One of the office doors, one that I knew had been closed, was slightly open. Just an inch. It was an old door, one of the few left with the original wooden frame and frosted glass panel. I knew for a fact that it had been shut when I arrived. No one else was here. And yet, it was open. Just a crack. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for something to explain it away. A draft? Maybe. But I hadn't felt any air movement. And besides, that door had been stiff, the kind that didn't move unless you pushed it hard. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself that maybe the maintenance staff had left it like that earlier. But that didn't explain why my stomach was knotting itself up, why my hands felt clammy against the desk. I decided to close it. I stood up slowly, trying to ignore the fact that my pulse had picked up, and walked towards the door. The hallway seemed longer than before, the fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. I reached out and pressed my palm against the wood, ready to push it shut. And then, from inside the dark office, I heard a creak. Not the building settling, not the hum of the AC. A floorboard shifting. Someone, or something, was inside. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The crack in the door was too small to see anything, but I felt it. The presence. The air was thick, pressing against me like a weight. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a dull, panicked thud. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of that hallway, to lock myself in my cubicle and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I didn't move, because at that moment, the door, on its own, began to open. Slowly, deliberately, and the darkness beyond it yawned wide. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My mouth went dry, my brain struggling to come up with an explanation that made sense. I was alone in this office, wasn't I? I should have run then, should have grabbed my things and waited by the exit until the security guard returned in the morning. But I didn't. Instead, I did something I still regret. I stepped forward, and I looked inside. I hesitated at the doorway, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling slightly as they hovered near the brass handle. The door was now open just wide enough to let a sliver of dim light spill into the darkened office beyond. The frosted glass panel reflected a distorted version of my face, my own eyes staring back at me, filled with uncertainty. A part of me, the logical part, was still clinging to the idea that there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe the door had been left unlocked, and a draft had nudged it open. Maybe the old hinges had given way, allowing it to drift ajar on its own. But then there was that other part of me, the one that had felt the weight in the air, the shift in the atmosphere, the near silent creak of a floorboard beneath unseen feet. I swallowed hard and reached out, my fingers pressing lightly against the door. It swung open without resistance. The room beyond was just another empty office, one of the many abandoned spaces left behind after the firm downsized. A desk sat in the corner, untouched, its surface coated in a fine layer of dust. The filing cabinets along the far wall were closed, their labels faded with age. The window blinds were drawn shut, allowing only a faint glow from the city outside to filter through the slats. It was empty, and yet it wasn't. The air was wrong in here, heavy, thick, as if something unseen was lingering in the corners where the light didn't quite reach. A chill rolled over my skin, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had only ever heard others talk about. I wasn't alone. There was no sound, no movement, nothing tangible that I could point to and say, "This is why I feel this way." But it was there. That undeniable presence, pressing against me, filling the room with an oppressive silence. I stepped back, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, I heard it. A breath. Not mine. Soft. Faint. Just behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My eyes darted around the office, scanning every shadow, every inch of empty space. But there was nothing. No one. Just the desk, the cabinets, the walls, and that heavy, suffocating stillness. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. For the first time, real fear curled in my stomach, a cold, sinking weight. I wasn't crazy. I had heard it. Someone, something, had been behind me. I backed away, one slow step at a time, until I was back in the hallway. The second I was clear of that office, I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the empty floor, loud and sharp. I exhaled, dragging a hand over my face. My palms were damp. My heart felt like it was trying to climb into my throat. I needed to calm down. Maybe I was just tired. That was it. I had been working for hours, barely taking a break. Lack of sleep does weird things to your mind. I turned on my heel and walked quickly back to my cubicle, refusing to look over my shoulder. By the time I sat down, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined it. The mind plays tricks, especially when you're alone in an old building in the middle of the night. I just needed to focus on work, finish the updates, and get through the night. But then, as I reached for my coffee cup, I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. My computer screen. I had left it on the system update page before stepping away. The progress bar had been at 64%, but now it was at the login screen. Someone had restarted my computer. My hand froze mid-reach. The office was locked. I was the only one here. And yet, in the time it took me to check that empty room and come back, someone had touched my system. I swallowed the lump in my throat and slowly moved my mouse. The login prompt flickered, waiting for my credentials. I reached out with careful fingers and typed in my password. The moment I pressed enter, the screen glitched. Just for a second. A brief, flickering distortion, like static on an old TV. And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by my usual desktop screen. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. I glanced at the small digital clock in the corner. 3:12 a.m. I hadn't even realized how much time had passed. A wave of exhaustion hit me then, but I knew sleep was out of the question. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of unease, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it had been an automatic restart. Maybe my system had glitched on its own. But I didn't believe that. Not after the door. Not after the breath. I forced myself to take a deep breath and shook my head. Enough. I wasn't going to sit here and freak myself out over something that probably had an explanation. I turned back to my screen, determined to finish my work. And then, click, the unmistakable sound of a doorknob turning. Somewhere behind me. I went completely still. I knew I was alone. I knew I had shut that office door. And yet, someone was opening a door on this floor. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The sound stopped. Silence! Then, click, another door. I swallowed hard. My skin felt like it was tightening over my bones. I couldn't tell which door it was, but I knew it was close. Too close. The air grew colder. Then, a slow, dragging footstep. Not from the hallway. From inside the office I had just closed. The footsteps moved toward the door, then stopped. I turned my head just enough to glance at the hallway. The door I had shut was open again, wide open. But this time, the darkness inside wasn't empty. I saw movement, a shifting just beyond the threshold, a shape standing there, watching me. I bolted out of my chair. My body moved before my mind could process it, pure adrenaline pushing me forward. I didn't look back. I ran, down the hallway, past the darkened offices, past the vending machines. My footsteps echoed in the empty building, the air around me thick with the feeling of being chased. I reached the stairwell and shoved the door open so hard it banged against the wall. I stumbled down the steps, taking them two at a time, my breath ragged. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby. The security desk was empty. Of course, it was. I pressed myself against the cold marble counter, trying to slow my breathing. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, gripping it tightly. I had to leave, but the building was locked until morning, and I wasn't alone. I turned my head, looking toward the darkened hallway that led back to the elevators. In the faint glow of the emergency exit sign, I saw something standing at the top of the stairs, waiting. The shadow at the top of the stairs was perfectly still, barely distinguishable from the darkness surrounding it. The faint glow from the exit sign gave just enough illumination to make out the edges, a tall, unmoving figure standing in silence, watching. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to break through my ribs. A cold sweat covered my skin, my hands gripping the edge of the security desk so tightly my knuckles ached. Every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to run, to get out of this building, to get as far away from whatever was standing there as possible. But my body refused to obey. And then it moved. Not a normal step, not the way a person would move down a flight of stairs. It shifted, almost gliding, like it wasn't constrained by the weight of a human body. The air in the lobby seemed to press in around me, thick and suffocating. I could hear something faint, like a soft dragging sound against the floor. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step back. My heel hit the base of the security desk, sending a dull thud through the empty room. The sound was deafening in the silence, but the figure didn't react. It just stood there. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling against the slick glass. I didn't even know who I was going to call. The police? What was I supposed to say? That a shadow was staring at me? That I was alone in a locked building, but somehow wasn't? I managed to unlock my screen, my thumb hovering over the dial pad. And then my phone screen flickered. The battery icon in the corner flashed red. My phone was dying. That didn't make sense. I had at least 40% left earlier. But now, as I watched, the percentage ticked down: 39%, 32%, 25%. And then the screen turned black. The figure on the stairs took another step. I dropped my phone. The sound of it hitting the tile barely registered over the roar of blood rushing in my ears. My body finally broke free from the paralysis, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. Not toward the stairs. Not toward the elevators. I ran deeper into the building. I knew it was stupid, but instinct took over. If I could find a room to lock myself in, if I could put some kind of barrier between me and whatever was coming down those stairs, maybe, just maybe, I could get through the night. I sprinted past the darkened hallways, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every flickering light overhead buzzed with an unnatural intensity. The walls felt like they were closing in. Then, a door to my right. I grabbed the handle and shoved it open, stumbling inside. It was the break room. The familiar sight of the vending machines, the round plastic tables, the company-branded coffee mugs scattered across the counter. It should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Because the second I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands shot out, grabbing the handle, yanking at it with every ounce of strength I had left. It wouldn't budge. Something was holding it shut. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal, my pulse hammering against my skull. My breaths came out in short, uneven bursts. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But then, the vending machine behind me flickered. The hum of electricity wavered, the fluorescent lights inside casting erratic shadows against the wall. The digital screen that normally displayed prices and selections glitched, the numbers scrambling into nonsensical symbols. And then, one by one, the snack items inside began to drop. Not just a single item, not the way they normally do when you make a selection. All of them. The candy bars, the bags of chips, the bottles of soda. They tumbled down in an unnatural rhythm, like unseen hands were pressing every button at once. I backed away slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. And then, as if in response to my movement, the microwave on the counter turned on by itself. The timer set itself, 30 seconds, 29, 28, counting down. The sound of something inside spinning, whirring, building pressure. I took another step back, pressing myself against the far wall. And then, just before the timer hit 0, the microwave door flung open with a loud metallic clang. Empty. But the smell, a wave of something rancid, something burnt and decayed, poured out into the room, thick and suffocating. I gagged, slapping a hand over my mouth. The stench clawed its way into my lungs, making my eyes water. It smelled like something had been rotting inside that microwave for days. And then, knock. A single, sharp knock on the break room door. I stopped breathing. Another knock, louder this time. I pressed my back harder against the wall, every muscle in my body locked in place. Then, the knocking turned into pounding. Fists slamming against the door, shaking it in its frame. The metal vibrated under the force, the sound so loud it drowned out my own heartbeat. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wanted in. I scrambled toward the counter, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a heavy ceramic coffee mug, my grip so tight my knuckles turned white. The pounding stopped. Silence! And then, the doorknob turned. Slowly. I watched, helpless, as it twisted all the way to the left. Click. The lock disengaged. The door creaked open just an inch. I didn't wait to see what was on the other side. I bolted. Shoving through the narrow gap, I sprinted down the hallway, my body running on pure instinct. The air around me felt heavier, the shadows shifting unnaturally, stretching toward me as I ran. I didn't stop. Not even when I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. Not even when I felt the air turn ice cold against the back of my neck. I ran until I reached the stairwell again, my breath ragged, my legs burning. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I turned around. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't real. Maybe I was hoping I had imagined it all. But when I looked back, there was nothing. The hallway was empty. The break room door was wide open, the vending machine still flickering with scrambled symbols. But the thing, the figure, the presence that had been right behind me was gone. I let out a shaky breath, my entire body trembling. I knew I couldn't stay here. Whatever was in this building with me, it wasn't just playing games anymore. It wanted me to see it. It wanted me to know it was real. And I had a horrible feeling that it wasn't going to let me leave. I didn't stop running until I reached the security desk. My breath came in short, desperate gasps, my chest tightening with every inhale. My legs burned from the sprint, but I barely noticed. My mind was too busy replaying everything I had just seen, everything I had just felt. The door unlocking on its own, the relentless pounding, the vending machine throwing out its entire stock like it was possessed, the microwave door slamming open with that putrid stench, and worst of all, the footsteps behind me. I had heard them, felt them, but when I turned around, nothing. I pressed my hands against the desk, trying to steady myself. The lobby felt impossibly large now, the dim emergency lighting casting long shadows across the floor. The quiet was unbearable. Then a thought cut through the panic. The cameras. The building had security cameras everywhere. If someone was really in here with me, they would have been caught on the footage. My hands fumbled with the keyboard as I clicked through the different feeds. The system was old, clunky, and slow, but it still worked. I pulled up the recordings from just minutes ago and rewound to the break room hallway. There I was, running. I clicked play. The video quality was grainy, but clear enough. I could see myself sprinting from the break room door, my body tense with fear. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for what had been behind me. But there was nothing. The hallway behind me was empty. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. That wasn't possible. I had heard it. I had felt the air shift as it moved. It had been right behind me. I switched to the lobby camera, rewinding to when I had first seen the shadow at the top of the stairs. My stomach turned. There was nothing there. No dark figure. No shifting shape. No one at the top of the stairs. But I had seen it. I had stared at it for what felt like an eternity. It had moved. It had come toward me. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I had seen. A deep, suffocating dread settled into my gut. If the cameras didn't pick up anything, then that meant it wasn't something physical. It wasn't a person. It was something else. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to regain control. Maybe the cameras had glitched. Maybe the lighting had been off. Maybe. Click. A soft, deliberate click sounded from the stairwell door. I turned my head slowly. The door I had sworn was locked was now slightly ajar. The darkness beyond it was absolute. My throat went dry. I hadn't unlocked that door. I knew I hadn't. I took a shaky step back from the desk, my eyes locked on the narrow gap. The dim light from the lobby barely reached past the threshold, leaving the stairwell in a thick, suffocating blackness. And then, a hand reached through. A long, pale hand, fingers impossibly thin, stretching toward the door frame. I froze. The fingers curled against the edge of the door, pressing into the wood like they were testing it, feeling it. The nails were jagged, almost broken, like they had been clawing at something for far too long. And then, the door creaked open further. The light from the lobby barely illuminated what was beyond, but I could make out something standing there. Something tall, Its body was just barely visible in the dim light. It was hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it were trying to see me better. The hand gripping the doorframe tightened, the fingers pressing in hard enough that I could hear the wood creak. My breath hitched. I took another step back. The figure moved. Not walked, moved. It jerked forward in a way that wasn't human, its limbs snapping into place as if they had been dislocated and forced back together. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran. But before I could even reach the main entrance, the emergency lights flickered. And then, darkness. Everything went black. The air in the lobby turned ice cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones, that freezes your breath in your throat. My hands shot out in front of me, trying to feel for something, anything to hold on to. Then, a whisper. Not words. Just a sound, soft and ragged, right behind me. The kind of sound a person makes when their lungs are too full of dust, too old and broken to breathe properly. I clenched my jaw so tightly I thought my teeth would crack. My fingers curled into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I couldn't move. I could feel it behind me. Close! Too close. The whispering grew louder, shifting, moving. It was circling me. The lights flickered back on for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, I saw it, right in front of me. Its face was inches from mine. Hollow, empty sockets where eyes should have been. A mouth that stretched too wide, lips cracked and peeling, as if it had been trying to scream for years, but had forgotten how. Its head twitched. And then, it smiled. The lights went out again. My body finally broke free from its paralysis. I stumbled backward, my hands reaching blindly in the dark. I hit something, a desk, maybe, and knocked over a chair. The sound crashed through the silence, and for a split second, everything was still. Then, the air shifted. It was moving. Fast. I ran. I didn't care where. I just needed to get away. My feet barely felt the ground beneath me as I sprinted down the hallway. The emergency exit. I just needed to make it to the emergency exit. But as I reached the door, my stomach dropped. The push bar was gone. Just a smooth, solid metal door with no way to open it. I turned around. The hallway behind me stretched longer than before, the walls shifting like they weren't solid. The lights flickered above me, casting distorted shadows that moved even when I didn't. I wasn't in the office anymore. Or at least, not in the office as it should be. The whispering started again, growing louder, closer. I pressed my back against the door, my hands shaking, my entire body trembling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. The shadows at the end of the hallway thickened, merging into something solid. Something coming toward me. I sucked in a shaky breath. And then, the lights blazed back on. The shadows disappeared. The hallway snapped back to normal. And the door behind me suddenly had its push bar again. Without thinking, I shoved against it. The door flew open. Cold night air hit my face. I stumbled outside, gasping for breath, my legs barely holding me up. I turned back toward the building, expecting to see something, some sign of what had just happened. But the office looked normal. Empty. Quiet. Like nothing had ever happened. Like it had just been another night. But I knew the truth. Something had been in there with me. And it had let me go. For now. I stood outside the office building, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The cold night air wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat that had filled the building moments before. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my knees, trying to steady myself, trying to convince my legs not to give out beneath me. Everything looked normal. The office stood still and silent under the dull glow of the streetlights, its glass doors reflecting nothing but the empty parking lot. No flickering lights, no twisted shadows, no sign that anything unnatural had ever taken place inside. But I knew better. I turned my head slowly, scanning the parking lot for any sign of life. My car sat where I had left it, untouched. There were no security guards outside, no late-night employees lingering. It was just me, alone. I forced myself to move, one foot in front of the other, until I reached my car. My fingers fumbled with the keys, shaking so badly that I dropped them twice before finally managing to unlock the door. I practically fell into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me as if that thin layer of metal and glass would keep me safe from whatever was inside the building. I jammed the key into the ignition, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The engine roared to life, the familiar hum of the car's heater filling the silence. I clutched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I looked back at the office. I shouldn't have. I should have just driven away, left it all behind, acted like it never happened. But some morbid, irrational part of me needed to see it one last time. Needed to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. And that's when I saw it. A single light, flickering, on the second floor, right where my office was. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I had turned off every light when I left. I was sure of it, but the light wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the figure standing in front of the window. A tall, thin silhouette, motionless against the glass, watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then it tilted its head, the exact same way it had inside. A sharp gasp tore from my throat, and my body finally obeyed me. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the parking lot. My hands were slick with sweat, my pulse hammering in my ears. I barely remembered the drive home. It was a blur of streetlights and empty roads, my mind racing with everything that had happened. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt like I was going to collapse. My entire body ached, my nerves frayed to the point of breaking. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it, then triple-checking it. Every window, every possible entry point, I made sure they were all sealed. But no matter how many times I checked, I still didn't feel safe. Because I knew the truth. Locked doors hadn't stopped it before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, staring at my front door, waiting for something to happen. Waiting for the shadows to move, for the whispering to start again. But nothing came. Not that night. Not the next. Not for weeks. At first, I avoided talking about it. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, a waking nightmare brought on by working too many late nights in that damn office. But no amount of logic could erase what I had seen, what I had felt. Then, one day, curiosity got the best of me. I went back. Not inside. Never inside. But I drove past the office during the day, parked across the street, and just watched. It looked normal. Employees came and went, talking, laughing, going about their lives like nothing had ever happened. Like they weren't working in a place that was wrong. Then I noticed something. A for lease sign. My stomach dropped. The company had moved out. I didn't know why. I didn't want to know why. I drove away that day and never looked back. But even now, years later, I still wonder, was it tied to the building? Or had it followed me home? It's been years since that night, but some things don't fade with time. They linger, woven into the background of your life like a stain you can't scrub out. no matter how hard you try. You learn to live around it, to ignore it as best as you can. But it never really goes away. I never set foot inside that office again. I never even looked up its history. People always tell you that knowing the truth brings closure, but that's a lie. Some things are better left unknown. Some questions don't need answers. But that doesn't mean the questions don't haunt me. For months after that night, I kept expecting something to happen. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, sure that I had heard the whispering again. I'd check the corners of my apartment, hold my breath every time I walked past a darkened room. The feeling of being watched never fully left me. At first, I told myself it was just paranoia, trauma playing tricks on my mind. But the thing about paranoia is that it feeds off patterns, off the little moments that don't quite make sense. Like how my closet door would be slightly open when I knew I had shut it. Or how I'd come home to find a light on that I didn't remember turning on. Or how, one night, I woke up and found my bedroom door open when I never sleep with it that way. Little things, subtle things, but enough to keep me on edge. I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help. Eventually, I moved, packed up my things, and left without looking back. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that office wasn't done with me. That somehow I had brought something home. The first few nights in my new place were better. It was quieter, cleaner. I finally started to believe that maybe it had all been in my head, that maybe leaving the office behind had been enough to put an end to it. But then, one night, I woke up with the same feeling it had in that office. The feeling of being watched. I lay there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. My new bedroom was pitch black, the only sound the faint hum of the heater. But something was off. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the room. Nothing. But then I saw it. The closet door. Slightly open. I had shut it before bed. I was sure of it. For a long time, I just stared at it, my mind racing. I wanted to get up, to shut it, to prove to myself that there was nothing there. But I couldn't move. Then, soft creaking, like weight shifting inside. I don't know how long I stayed like that, gripping my phone so tightly my hand went numb. Minutes? Hours? It felt endless. But eventually, I did move. Slowly, carefully. I got up, never taking my eyes off the closet. I didn't check inside. I didn't want to know. Instead, I grabbed a chair, wedged it under the doorknob, and backed away. Then I left the room. I sat in my living room until morning, every light on, my back pressed against the couch, watching the hallway. When the sun finally rose, I packed a bag and left. I never slept in that apartment again. Some might say I was overreacting. That fear had rewired my brain, that I had let one bad night in an old office twist my perception of reality. Maybe they're right. Maybe there was nothing in that closet, just like there was nothing standing in the window that night when I drove away. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and my mind drifts back to that office, I wonder, what would have happened if I had opened the door? At the time, I was 19 and had just finished my first year of community college. Summer had arrived, and with it, long, warm nights that stretched endlessly. My closest friend, who we'll call D, had been back in town for a couple of weeks. He went to school out of state, so whenever he returned, we made the most of it. Our days were spent fishing at the lake, shooting hoops at the abandoned school lot, and sometimes just driving around with no destination. I still lived with my parents back then, in a house that sat near the edge of the forest. It wasn't isolated, but the nearest neighbor was about half a mile away. Our backyard faded into the trees, and beyond that was nothing but wilderness for miles. My dad had always warned me not to wander too far in, especially after dark, but had grown up exploring those woods. There were old logging roads, crumbling hunting cabins, and places so overgrown they felt untouched. That summer, my routine was predictable. I'd wake up late, have coffee on the porch, and then find something to do with D. If he wasn't around, I'd go for a run, mess around online, or just lay in bed scrolling through my phone. Nights were the best, though. The town felt different after sunset, quieter, heavier, as if the dark carried some weight that daylight erased. One night, Dee and I were hanging out at the gas station, a common meeting spot for people our age. The place had a couple of benches outside, and from there, you could see the town's only traffic light blinking red in the distance. We had nothing planned, just talking about the usual work, school, girls. At some point, Dee leaned back and stared at the woods across the road. "You ever get weird feelings about those trees?" he asked. I smirked. "What, like some monsters watching?" "Nah," he said, shaking his head. I don't know. Something about them feels off." I didn't think much of it at the time. The woods had always been there, unchanged, just part of the background. Sure, they got dark at night, pitch black if there was no moon, but that was normal. That night, I drove home around midnight. My parents were already asleep, and the house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. I went to my room, left my window cracked open for the cool air, and scrolled through my phone until I felt tired. Outside, the forest was a solid wall of blackness. No streetlights reached that far, and the only sound was the steady hum of crickets. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last night I'd ever feel completely at ease in that house. That night, I fell asleep with my window cracked open, something I had done 100 times before. The air was cool, the distant chirping of crickets created a steady rhythm, and I let myself drift off, completely unaware that this was the last time my room would ever feel like a safe place. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, not groggy, not half asleep, but fully aware, like my body had detected something before my mind could process it. The room was dark except for the dim light from my phone screen, which had fallen face up onto my blanket. My heart was beating harder than it should have been, and I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. A rustling sound. Faint, but close. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too controlled. Leaves shifting, twigs snapping lightly, like footsteps, but softer, as if someone or something was being careful. I sat up and glanced toward the window. The sheer curtain moved slightly, barely touched by the breeze, but beyond it, I saw nothing but the black void of the forest. My stomach tightened. I wanted to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer passing through, but something felt off. I had grown up here. I knew the sounds of the woods, and this wasn't normal. I reached over and grabbed my phone, my fingers hovering over the flashlight button. But I hesitated. A small, irrational voice in my head told me not to turn it on. Instead, I stayed still, straining to hear anything else. The crickets had stopped. That was the first real warning sign. The woods were never completely silent. Even at night, there was always something. Bugs, birds, the distant hoot of an owl. But now, nothing. Just a thick, suffocating quiet that made my skin crawl. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Not on my window, but on the wall. The outside wall of my room. I froze. My pulse slammed against my ribs. It wasn't a loud knock, more like testing, feeling out a reaction. If I hadn't been awake already, I might not have noticed it at all. I waited, my hands clenched into fists, my body tense. Another knock. 3 again. Same quiet, deliberate rhythm. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A part of me wanted to believe it was D messing with me, but there was no way. He wasn't the type to pull pranks, and besides, the forest behind my house was thick. Nobody would walk through it just to scare me in the middle of the night. Another knock. This time, closer to the window. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees just beyond my backyard. My breath caught in my throat as I searched for movement. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray dog, but the yard was empty. Then I saw it. A figure, just at the tree line. Not moving, not hiding, just standing there. I couldn't make out any details, only that it was tall, human-shaped, and completely still. The flashlight shook in my grip. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it didn't disappear. It was real, and it was watching. My hands felt numb. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I was paralyzed. Then, without a sound, the figure turned and stepped back into the trees, vanishing into the darkness. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and backed away, my heart hammering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the time morning came, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I had been half dreaming, caught in that strange place between sleep and waking. But when I went outside later that day, I saw them. Footprints. In the dirt just outside my window. And they weren't mine. At the time, I was 19 and had just finished my first year of community college. Summer had arrived, and with it, long, warm nights that stretched endlessly. My closest friend, who we'll call D, had been back in town for a couple of weeks. He went to school out of state, so whenever he returned, we made the most of it. Our days were spent fishing at the lake, shooting hoops at the abandoned school lot, and sometimes just driving around with no destination. I still lived with my parents back then, in a house that sat near the edge of the forest. It wasn't isolated, but the nearest neighbor was about half a mile away. Our backyard faded into the trees, and beyond that was nothing but wilderness for miles. My dad had always warned me not to wander too far in, especially after dark, but had grown up exploring those woods. There were old logging roads, crumbling hunting cabins, and places so overgrown they felt untouched. That summer, my routine was predictable. I'd wake up late, have coffee on the porch, and then find something to do with D. If he wasn't around, I'd go for a run, mess around online, or just lay in bed scrolling through my phone. Nights were the best, though. The town felt different after sunset, quieter, heavier, as if the dark carried some weight that daylight erased. One night, Dee and I were hanging out at the gas station, a common meeting spot for people our age. The place had a couple of benches outside, and from there, you could see the town's only traffic light blinking red in the distance. We had nothing planned, just talking about the usual work, school, girls. At some point, Dee leaned back and stared at the woods across the road. "You ever get weird feelings about those trees?" he asked. I smirked. "What, like some monsters watching?" "Nah," he said, shaking his head. I don't know. Something about them feels off." I didn't think much of it at the time. The woods had always been there, unchanged, just part of the background. Sure, they got dark at night, pitch black if there was no moon, but that was normal. That night, I drove home around midnight. My parents were already asleep, and the house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. I went to my room, left my window cracked open for the cool air, and scrolled through my phone until I felt tired. Outside, the forest was a solid wall of blackness. No streetlights reached that far, and the only sound was the steady hum of crickets. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last night I'd ever feel completely at ease in that house. That night, I fell asleep with my window cracked open, something I had done 100 times before. The air was cool, the distant chirping of crickets created a steady rhythm, and I let myself drift off, completely unaware that this was the last time my room would ever feel like a safe place. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, not groggy, not half asleep, but fully aware, like my body had detected something before my mind could process it. The room was dark except for the dim light from my phone screen, which had fallen face up onto my blanket. My heart was beating harder than it should have been, and I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. A rustling sound. Faint, but close. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too controlled. Leaves shifting, twigs snapping lightly, like footsteps, but softer, as if someone or something was being careful. I sat up and glanced toward the window. The sheer curtain moved slightly, barely touched by the breeze, but beyond it, I saw nothing but the black void of the forest. My stomach tightened. I wanted to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer passing through, but something felt off. I had grown up here. I knew the sounds of the woods, and this wasn't normal. I reached over and grabbed my phone, my fingers hovering over the flashlight button. But I hesitated. A small, irrational voice in my head told me not to turn it on. Instead, I stayed still, straining to hear anything else. The crickets had stopped. That was the first real warning sign. The woods were never completely silent. Even at night, there was always something. Bugs, birds, the distant hoot of an owl. But now, nothing. Just a thick, suffocating quiet that made my skin crawl. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Not on my window, but on the wall. The outside wall of my room. I froze. My pulse slammed against my ribs. It wasn't a loud knock, more like testing, feeling out a reaction. If I hadn't been awake already, I might not have noticed it at all. I waited, my hands clenched into fists, my body tense. Another knock. 3 again. Same quiet, deliberate rhythm. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A part of me wanted to believe it was D messing with me, but there was no way. He wasn't the type to pull pranks, and besides, the forest behind my house was thick. Nobody would walk through it just to scare me in the middle of the night. Another knock. This time, closer to the window. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees just beyond my backyard. My breath caught in my throat as I searched for movement. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray dog, but the yard was empty. Then I saw it. A figure, just at the tree line. Not moving, not hiding, just standing there. I couldn't make out any details, only that it was tall, human-shaped, and completely still. The flashlight shook in my grip. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it didn't disappear. It was real, and it was watching. My hands felt numb. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I was paralyzed. Then, without a sound, the figure turned and stepped back into the trees, vanishing into the darkness. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and backed away, my heart hammering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the time morning came, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I had been half dreaming, caught in that strange place between sleep and waking. But when I went outside later that day, I saw them. Footprints in the dirt just outside my window. And they weren't mine. I didn't sleep. I didn't even move. I sat curled up on the couch, my phone clutched in my hands, staring at those 2 words on the screen. Come outside. The message was still unread. I hadn't opened it. I couldn't. My body felt frozen, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions. My dad was asleep in his room, unaware that my phone had just delivered another gut-wrenching message from it. I knew better than to go outside. I wasn't that stupid. But knowing that thing was still out there, watching, waiting, made my skin crawl. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay calm, to breathe. But every time I did, I pictured those eyes at my window. Those unnatural, inhuman eyes staring back at me, unblinking, as if peering straight into my soul. I needed help. I couldn't just sit here. I unlocked my phone, my fingers shaking as I navigated to Dee's contact. Had been with me through all of this. Had seen the tracks, heard the noises. I hesitated for half a second, then hit call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then his groggy voice answered. Dude, what the hell? It's 3 in the... It messaged me again. Silence. Then, a low, barely awake. What? I swallowed hard. It texted me again. Just now. There was a shuffling noise on his end, like he was sitting up in bed. What did it say? I hesitated before reading it out loud. Come outside. Another pause. Then, are you messing with me? No, I snapped. My voice cracked, making me sound just as scared as I felt. I swear. I don't know how it has my number, but a noise cut me off. Not from the phone, from outside. Soft, slow, footsteps, right outside the living room window. I went rigid, my pulse slamming in my ears. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see the window in my peripheral vision. The blinds were closed, but that didn't make me feel any safer. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. Then, knock, knock. I shot up from the couch, knocking over my phone in the process. The knocking had come from the front door this time. Not my window. The front door. Dee was still on the line, his voice now urgent. Dude, what's happening? I grabbed my phone, whispering frantically. It's at the door. Do not open it. No chance of that happening. The knocking came again. Slow. Deliberate. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. Then I heard the doorknob turn. The air in my lungs froze. It was trying to get in. I moved back, pressing myself against the couch, my mind racing. My dad was still asleep. If I screamed, would he hear me? I glanced toward the hallway. The knob stopped turning. Then, the knocking started again. Knock! 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 I couldn't take it anymore. I ran, straight for my dad's room. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. He jerked awake instantly, reaching for the bat. What? Someone's at the door, I gasped, my chest heaving. They tried the lock. His face went cold. He was up in a second, moving past me toward the hallway. I followed close behind as he stomped toward the front door, gripping the bat so hard his knuckles turned white. The knocking had stopped, but whoever had been there was still outside. My dad unlocked the door and yanked it open before I could protest. Nothing. The porch was empty. The yard still and undisturbed. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I stared, my stomach churning. I knew I had heard it. I knew someone had tried to open the door. My dad turned back to me, lowering the bat. "You're staying in my room tonight." I didn't argue. The next morning, my dad checked the security cameras. Nothing. No movement. No shadowy figures. No signs of anything. I refused to believe it. Dee and I spent the next few days trying to piece things together. We went back to the forest, retraced our steps. But the tracks we had found before were gone, washed away by the wind or buried under fresh layers of leaves. The text messages never came again. But the number? It didn't exist. I tried searching it online. Nothing. No records. No owner. I even tried calling it. Disconnected. It was as if the number had never been real in the first place. For weeks, I was paranoid. I barely slept. Every night, I waited for another knock at the door, another scratch at my window. But it never happened again. Whatever had been watching me, it was gone. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I was chosen that night, that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to, and that one day, it might come back. Some things in life don't have explanations. No matter how much we dig, how much we search for answers, there are events that will always remain in the shadows, just out of reach, just beyond human understanding. What happened to me that night? I've learned to live with it. But I've never forgotten. For weeks after the final text message, I was paranoid. I didn't walk outside alone after dark. I double-checked every lock before bed. I made sure my windows were shut tight, my curtains drawn, my phone always within reach, just in case. But the messages never came again. The knocking never returned. And eventually, life moved on. Dee and I stopped going into the woods. We never talked about it in detail again, almost like speaking it into existence would make it real all over again. Even my dad, after that one night, never brought it up. He probably thought it was some stranger messing with me. But I knew better. I know what I saw, what I felt. And every once in a while, when I'm alone, when the house is quiet, when the wind outside sounds just a little too human, I get that feeling again. Like I'm being watched. Like something out there remembers me. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for the right moment to come back. It started on an ordinary Thursday night. The office was nearly empty, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and my computer screen flickering slightly as I tried to push through the last few hours of work. I had been working late a lot recently, deadlines piling up, endless revisions, and the kind of exhaustion that leaves you numb to everything but the task in front of you. The building itself wasn't anything special. A typical corporate office, bland white walls, gray carpets, and that faint smell of stale coffee that never really goes away. I had been there for 3 years, and nothing about it ever felt strange. The hallways were always quiet at night, and the only sound, besides the occasional creak of the air vents, was the steady tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. The company had recently downsized, leaving entire sections of the floor vacant. What used to be a bustling space full of coworkers, hurried conversations, and ringing phones had become eerily silent. Most of the desks around me were empty, abandoned with chairs pushed back just enough to make it look like someone had left in a hurry. By 9 p.m., only a handful of people remained, scattered across the floor. I saw their names pop up occasionally in the office group chat, quick messages about wrapping up for the night or locking the doors on the way out. But one by one, those messages stopped. People logged off. Lights went out. By 10:30, I was alone. I wasn't really concerned at first. I had stayed this late plenty of times before. But something about that night felt different. It wasn't a sudden feeling, just a slow, creeping awareness that settled into the back of my mind. The air in the office felt heavier, the quiet too thick, like the entire building was holding its breath. I stretched my arms, rolling my shoulders to shake off the stiffness. My eyes flicked to the large window beside my desk. The city stretched out below, an endless grid of lights and moving cars. Even though it was late, the world outside still felt alive. It was reassuring in a way. Out there, life continued. In here, I wasn't so sure. The break room was a short walk down the hall, just past the empty cubicles. I stood, grabbed my coffee mug, and stepped away from my desk, the sound of my own footsteps suddenly feeling too loud. The hallway leading to the break room was long, lined with glass partitions that reflected just enough light to cast faint shadows. I had walked this path hundreds of times before, but that night it felt different. The lights overhead flickered, just once, barely noticeable. I shook it off, rubbing the back of my neck as I stepped into the break room. It was empty, of course. The vending machine hummed softly in the corner, and the fridge let out a low, mechanical groan as it cycled on. I poured myself another cup of coffee, staring at the black liquid as it swirled in my mug. Then I heard it. A faint shuffle. Not loud, not obvious, just the softest sound, like the whisper of fabric moving against the floor. I froze, my hand tightening around the coffee mug. The sound had come from behind me, near the entrance to the break room. Slowly, I turned my head, expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Maybe someone else was still working late. Maybe I wasn't actually alone. I stepped back into the hallway, glancing left and right. Nothing. The lights flickered again, just for a split second, like they were struggling to stay on. I shook my head, forcing a small chuckle. I need to get out of here, I muttered under my breath, my own voice sounding too loud in the silence. With that, I headed back to my desk, sipping my coffee and pushing the thought out of my mind. Just the building settling. Just my nerves. But as I sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wasn't alone, and I would soon find out why. I sat back down at my desk, gripping my coffee mug a little tighter than before. The office still felt too quiet, but I told myself it was just the late hour getting to me. Long nights alone in a nearly empty building would make anyone's mind play tricks. I forced myself to focus on the screen, my fingers moving over the keyboard, trying to drown out the unease that had settled in my chest. A few minutes passed. Nothing unusual. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling lights and the occasional click of my mouse. I exhaled slowly, shaking off the tension. Just stress, that's all. Then it happened again. That soft shuffle. Closer this time. My hands froze on the keyboard. I held my breath, ears straining for any sign of movement. The sound had come from the direction of the hallway, the same hallway I had just walked through. I turned my head slowly, eyes flicking toward the glass partitions that lined the cubicles. From where I sat, I could see the entire stretch of the hallway. It was empty. The office was still, but the feeling remained, that creeping sensation of being watched. I let out a slow breath, forcing a small chuckle. Maybe I'm losing it, I muttered under my breath. But then, click, the unmistakable sound of a keyboard key being pressed. Not mine. Not from my desk. Somewhere else. My stomach tightened. I swiveled my chair slightly, eyes scanning the office floor. The glow from my monitor cast a faint reflection in the window beside me, distorting the view of the darkened cubicles beyond. I turned back toward my screen, pretending to work, but my ears were sharp, waiting for another sound. And then, click, click, click. 3 distinct key presses. Deliberate, slow. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Maybe someone really was still here, finishing up work. Maybe I had just assumed I was the last one when someone else was tucked away in a far corner of the office. I checked the company chat. Everyone had logged off hours ago. A cold chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, fingers hovering over my keyboard. Maybe I should call out, ask if someone was there. But something in me refused. Something told me I didn't want to know the answer. Instead, I reached for my phone, unlocking it with slightly trembling fingers. I pulled up the office directory, searching for the security guard's number. It wasn't unusual for them to do late-night rounds, but I hadn't seen anyone all evening. Just as I was about to hit call, another sound. Not a key pressed this time. A chair. Rolling. Slow. Unmistakable. I gripped my phone tighter, turning my head toward the far end of the office. The cubicles stretched into darkness, the motion sensor lights having shut off past a certain point. The rolling noise had come from somewhere beyond that darkness. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I wasn't about to walk into the unlit section of the office. I wasn't that curious. Instead, I grabbed my bag, deciding I had done enough work for the night. If someone else was here, they could finish their business alone. I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder and shutting my laptop. The second I did, a tap on glass. Sharp. Direct. I spun toward the source of the noise. The glass wall separating the hallway from the cubicles. Nothing. The office was empty. I forced myself to move. I walked toward the elevators, keeping my pace steady, refusing to glance over my shoulder. Then, footsteps. Soft. Behind me. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped, too. My pulse hammered in my ears. My fingers hovered over my phone screen. I took another step. A single step echoed mine. I turned my head slightly, peering out of the corner of my eye. The hallway was empty. The silence stretched. Then, a whisper, faint, just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. I bolted for the elevator. My footsteps pounded against the carpet, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I slammed the button for the ground floor. The doors didn't open fast enough. As they finally slid apart, I stepped inside, jabbing the button repeatedly. The moment the doors began to close, I saw it. A shape, just beyond the last cubicle. Not moving, just standing there, watching. Then, the elevator door shut. I stood frozen, heart hammering as the numbers above the door counted down. When the doors finally opened onto the lobby, I stepped out hesitantly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his phone. "You good?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I forced a shaky nod. "Yeah, just long night." He nodded, clearly uninterested. "You the last one out?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. "Yeah, I think so." I walked past him without another word. pushing through the glass doors into the cold night air. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew I wasn't alone in that office. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape standing at the edge of the cubicles, unmoving, watching. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a trick of the light, some weird reflection from the glass panels. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the unease never left. The memory clung to me like a shadow, making my coffee taste bitter and my commute feel longer than usual. Still, work was work, and I had deadlines to meet. I arrived at the office just before noon, later than usual thanks to my restless night. The place felt different in the daylight, less eerie, more alive. The usual hum of conversation, clacking keyboards, and ringing phones filled the air. It was as if the strange events from the night before had never happened. I made my way to my desk, tossing my bag onto the chair. Everything was exactly as I had left it. My laptop was closed, my coffee cup still where it had abandoned it. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head at myself. I was about to sit down when I noticed something. My chair. It wasn't where I had left it. It was pulled slightly away from the desk, turned at an angle, just enough to be noticeable. I knew for a fact I had tucked it in before leaving. A small thing, barely anything, but my stomach twisted. I shook it off. Maybe the cleaning staff had moved it while vacuuming. Maybe it had shifted slightly when I grabbed my bag. I sat down, opening my laptop. As the screen came to life, something else caught my eye. An open document. I didn't remember leaving anything open. The file name was just a string of numbers, random, no meaning to it. I clicked on it. One sentence stared back at me, written in the middle of the page. "You saw me." My breath caught. I hadn't typed that. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. The office around me felt like it had gone silent, even though I knew people were still talking, still working. I deleted the text, closed the document. This was a joke. It had to be. Maybe someone from IT had accessed my computer remotely. Maybe a coworker had messed with me. But why? I glanced around, searching for any sign that someone was watching, waiting for a reaction. No one seemed to notice. I tried to focus on work, forcing myself to push past the tension crawling up my spine. Hours passed, the usual routine helping to ground me. Emails, spreadsheets, meetings, everything normal. But then, as the office emptied again and the day faded into evening, the unease returned, and the noises started. It was subtle at first. A soft creak, the kind of sound an old chair makes when someone leans back in it. Then the rustling of papers, the occasional tap of a keyboard. But when I turned my head, expecting to see a late working colleague, there was no one. The entire back section of the office was empty. The sounds continued, sporadic, just enough to keep my nerves on edge. I tried to ignore them. I put my headphones in, played music at a low volume. But even then, I swore I could still hear them beneath the music, like whispers under running water. Then, the printer turned on. The sudden whir of the machine made me jolt. I pulled out my earbuds, staring across the room. It was printing something. No one was there. I stood up, my heart pounding as I walked over. The printer spit out a single sheet of paper. I reached for it with hesitant fingers. It was blank. At first. Then, as I turned it under the office light, faint text, almost like it had been printed in the lightest gray possible. "You shouldn't be here." I dropped the paper, stepped back. The air felt thick, pressing down on my chest. The office suddenly felt too big, too empty. Then, the overhead lights flickered. Once, twice, then held steady. My hands clenched into fists, my breathing uneven. I looked around again, my paranoia now a full-blown, pounding presence in my skull. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the paper before shoving it into the recycling bin. I wasn't going to stay here any longer. I shut my laptop and stuffed it into my bag, not bothering to check if I had saved my work. I needed to leave. Now. I took the same path to the elevator as the night before, my legs moving faster than usual. I didn't look down the hallway. I didn't look at the cubicles. I kept my eyes on the doors ahead. But as I reached out to press the button, a reflection in the dark glass panel beside the elevator. Behind me, a figure standing in the hallway, watching. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered again. I slammed the elevator button repeatedly, my pulse hammering. The doors opened. I stepped inside. And just before they shut, a shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Not walking, not running, just shifting, like it had been waiting. I didn't go straight home. I needed to know if this was some elaborate joke or if something was seriously wrong with that office. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was one person I could call, an old coworker who had worked in that building longer than me. Someone who had spent plenty of late nights there. I hit dial. He answered on the third ring. "Man, it's late," he said. "What's up?" I hesitated. How was I even supposed to explain this? Have you ever noticed anything weird at the office? Late at night? Silence. Then a quiet sigh. "You stayed late, didn't you?" I swallowed. "Yeah." Another pause. "You see something?" His voice was lower now. Serious. I gripped the steering wheel. "I don't know. Maybe. I keep hearing things. Seeing things that shouldn't be there." He let out another breath. "You're not the first." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, there was a guy. Years ago, worked late all the time. One night, he left in a hurry, just like you. Next morning, his desk was cleared out. Never came back." My mouth felt dry. "Did he say anything?" I asked. My coworker hesitated. "Just one thing. Told me never to stay past 10. I checked the time. It was 10:07 p.m. The clock read 10:07 p.m. I had never felt fear settle into my bones quite like this. A deep, instinctual dread clawed at my insides, screaming at me that I had made a mistake, one I might not be able to undo. Still gripping my phone, I swallowed hard and asked, "Did he say why?" My coworker hesitated. "No, just looked shaken as hell. Told me never to stay past 10. Then he left and never came back. No 2 weeks' notice, no explanation. Just gone." The air in my car felt thick, stifling. "You need to listen, man," my coworker continued, his voice urgent now. "Whatever's happening there, it's not your imagination. If I were you, I wouldn't go back." I squeezed my eyes shut, inhaling through my nose. "I still have my stuff there," I muttered. "Laptop, car keys, everything." "Forget it," he said immediately. "Leave it. Call in sick. Quit if you have to." But that wasn't an option. I had important files on that laptop, files I couldn't just abandon. And my keys? I couldn't leave my car in the parking garage overnight. I didn't have a choice. I had to go back inside. The office looked the same as it left it, silent, still, bathed in a dull glow from the emergency exit signs. But something felt off, like the air itself had changed. I moved quickly, my footsteps unnervingly loud against the polished floor. My desk wasn't far. If I grabbed my things fast, I could be out in under a minute. I rounded the corner of the cubicles and froze. My laptop was open. The screen was glowing. A single document was up on the screen, the same one from before. But now there was more text. You stayed past 10. My chest tightened. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. The suffocating stillness of the office. Then, a sound. Soft, deliberate. Footsteps. Slow, measured steps. Coming from somewhere deeper in the office. I barely breathed. The steps stopped. Silence! Then, a whisper. Right behind me. Why are you still here? My heart slammed against my ribs as I spun around. No one. But the whisper had been right there. So close, I should have felt breath on my neck. I grabbed my laptop with shaking hands, shoved it into my bag, and turned for the exit. I didn't look back. The elevator was just down the hall. 20, maybe 30 feet. But as I walked, it felt farther, like the hallway was stretching, growing longer with every step. The lights flickered overhead. I forced myself to keep going. Another flicker. And suddenly, the cubicles were gone. The desks, the office furniture, all of it had disappeared. The hallway was empty. Just an endless stretch of floor and ceiling, fading into darkness behind me. I broke into a run. The elevator stayed the same distance away, no matter how fast I moved. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. Then, a shadow at the end of the hallway, blocking the elevator. It was tall, unnaturally so, a dark, elongated silhouette with no features, no face. Just standing there, waiting. The lights flickered again, and it was closer. I stopped. My pulse pounded in my ears. The lights flickered once more. It took another step. My legs locked in place. I couldn't move. The lights flickered. It was just feet away. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. The lights flickered. Silence! I opened my eyes. The hallway was normal again. The elevator was right in front of me. The shadow was gone. Shaking, I reached out and hit the call button. The doors slid open. I stepped inside, my breath coming in uneven gasps. The doors began to close. And just before they did, a whisper. Soft. Right next to my ear. See you tomorrow. The doors shut. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the cold metal of the elevator. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The numbers above the door blinked as the elevator descended. 9, 8, 7. Then the lights inside flickered, and the elevator stopped. The overhead light dimmed to a sickly glow. My breath hitched. I reached for the emergency button, and then the elevator dropped. The sensation was instant and gut-wrenching. My stomach lurched as gravity abandoned me. The numbers on the display blurred, dropping faster than I could process. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Then, a screech. The elevator slammed to a stop. I collapsed to the floor, gasping. The light flickered again, and the doors slid open. Not to the parking garage, not to the lobby, to the office, as if I had never left. The cubicles stretched before me, silent, waiting, and in the distance, the shadow, closer than before, watching, waiting. The elevator doors stood open, revealing the office. Not the parking garage, not the ground floor, the same damn office. My chest tightened. My hands trembled as I gripped the cold metal walls of the elevator, trying to ground myself. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like something unseen was pressing against me, forcing me to stay. But I wasn't staying. I pushed myself up, one shaky step at a time. If I just walked forward, if I just kept moving, maybe the hallway would lead somewhere else, somewhere real. The moment I stepped out, the doors slammed shut behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew if I looked, something would be there. The silence stretched, suffocating. I forced myself to walk. One step, then another. The cubicles stood empty, the computer monitors dark. Nothing moved. No sound except the dull hum of the overhead lights. But I wasn't fooled. Something was here. Watching. Waiting. The air felt wrong, like a pressure against my skin, a weight I couldn't shake. I walked faster, heart pounding in my ears. My desk had to be close. If I could just, a whisper, so quiet, so close, I nearly stopped breathing. Where do you think you're going? My vision blurred. The walls felt closer, the cubicles tighter. I started to run. The faster I moved, the more everything shifted. The walls seemed to stretch, elongating into impossible angles. The exit sign at the far end flickered, but it never got any closer. The floor beneath my feet felt different, softer, like I wasn't running on solid ground anymore. I didn't stop to check. I just ran. Then, a sudden cold gust of air from behind me, like something massive had just moved. I wasn't alone. I forced myself forward. Faster. I could see the break room up ahead, the door slightly ajar. It wasn't an exit, but it was something. The whisper came again. You can't leave. The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. The moment my hand touched the break room door, the lights overhead cut out completely. Pitch darkness. And then, the breath on my neck. I turned. I didn't want to, but I did. And I saw it. Up close. The shadow was no longer a vague silhouette. It had form, shape, tall, twisted, arms too long. Its fingers curled like claws, its face. There was no face. Just a void, a dark, endless emptiness where a face should be. But I could feel it looking at me. I stepped back, hitting the break room door with my shoulder. My fingers fumbled for the handle. The thing took a step forward. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. The break room was small. A table, a few chairs, a vending machine, and a microwave on the counter. But there was something new. Something that wasn't there before. A mirror. Large. Floor length. Leaning against the far wall. And in the reflection, the office behind me was wrong. The cubicles were distorted, twisted at unnatural angles. The walls bled darkness. And the shadow, it was closer in the reflection, right behind me. But when I turned around, the room was empty. The only thing moving was my reflection, my own chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Then, it stopped. My reflection froze. I was still breathing, but the me in the mirror wasn't. Then, slowly, the reflection smiled. My stomach dropped. I wasn't smiling, but the thing in the mirror was. Then, it moved. Not like a reflection. Not in sync with me. It moved on its own. I backed away, my breath ragged. The smile on my reflection widened, too wide, stretching past what was humanly possible. And then, it stepped forward, out of the mirror. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just turned and bolted out of the break room, slamming the door behind me. The office was still warped, still wrong. The hallway twisted ahead, stretching into a void of darkness. But there, at the end, the elevator. The doors were open, waiting. I forced my legs to move, sprinting toward it. The air felt heavy, suffocating, like something was closing in behind me. I didn't look. I wouldn't look. I threw myself inside, slamming the button for the lobby. For a split second, I saw the reflection in the elevator's steel doors. It wasn't me. It was still smiling. The door shut. The elevator descended. This time, it didn't stop. It didn't glitch. It went straight to the lobby. When the doors finally opened, the office was gone. The air was normal. The world outside was real. I staggered into the parking lot, my heart hammering. My car was still there. The night was quiet. I didn't look back. I just got in, started the engine, and drove. Far away. And I never went back. I didn't stop driving until the office was miles behind me. The cold sweat clung to my skin, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept expecting to see something in the rearview mirror, that smile, that twisted reflection, the shadow in the hallway, but the road behind me was empty. No flickering lights. No endless corridors. Just the dark highway stretching into the night. But I still couldn't breathe right. My chest felt tight, like something unseen had wrapped around my ribs and wouldn't let go. My mind kept replaying those last few moments in the office, the way the mirror version of me moved on its own, how it stepped out like it belonged here. And worst of all, that smile. Not a grin, not a smirk. Something else. Something that knew me. Something that had been waiting. I don't remember the drive home. My body was on autopilot, my mind still stuck in that nightmare of an office, trapped in that endless hallway. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I didn't sleep for a long time after that. The next day, I quit. No 2 weeks notice. No explanation. Just a short email that probably didn't make much sense. I didn't care. I just wanted out. The company called me. First once, then twice. My manager left a voicemail asking what had happened, but I never listened to it. I deleted the messages without even opening them. After a while, they stopped calling. And for a while, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had escaped. But then, the dreams started. At first, they were just flashes. A dark hallway stretching on forever. The flickering overhead lights. The whisper just out of reach. But then, the dreams became more real. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, with the distinct feeling that someone had been watching me. The worst one? I was standing in my bedroom, staring into my closet mirror. And the me in the reflection? Smiling. Wider. Wider. Until its lips split apart, stretching too far down its face, revealing teeth that weren't mine. I woke up screaming. After that, I covered every mirror in my apartment. I threw out the one in my bedroom completely. But no matter how much I tried to forget, to move on, I could still feel it. That thing that had been in the office with me. That thing that had been watching. Waiting. It's been months now. I've moved cities, started a new job, tried to build a new life. And for the most part, I've convinced myself that it's over. But some nights, when I wake up in the dead of night, I still feel it. The weight of something unseen. The sense that I'm not alone. And every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A reflection in a window. A shadow in the hallway that shouldn't be there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see it. That same smile. Waiting. If you ever find yourself alone in an office late at night, if the hallways start to feel too long, if the reflections start moving when you don't look too closely. And whatever you do, don't smile back.